The gate opened before the car even stopped. That was the first thing people noticed about the Hale estate. The gate never waited. It moved the moment the sensors picked up the license plate of the black car, and it swung inward with the quiet certainty of something that had never once been asked to hurry. The driveway was long enough that a person walking from the gate to the front door would have time to change their mind twice. The grounds on either side were kept in a way that looked effortless and cost a great deal, because that was the point. Perfectly trimmed hedges, gravel that was raked every morning by a man named Gerald who had been doing it for 11 years and who had never once been late. A fountain at the center of the circular drive that ran all day and all night, even in winter, because Mr. Hale had once said, in passing, that silence in a garden felt like neglect. Nobody at the estate neglected anything. That was the rule. It was not written anywhere. It did not need to be. It was understood the way cold is understood when you step outside in January, immediately, physically, without anyone needing to explain it to you. Dominic Hale was 41 years old. He had built 3 companies from nothing, sold 2 of them for numbers that made financial journalists stop mid-sentence, and kept the third, a private investment group that controlled stakes in ports, logistics networks, and infrastructure projects across 14 countries. He was not famous in the way that celebrities are famous. He was known. There is a difference. Celebrities are recognized. People like Dominic Hale are simply aware of. You would not see his face on the cover of a magazine in an airport. You would, however, find his name in the small print of contracts that moved things, goods, capital, decisions, across the world. He was, by every available measure, a man who had arranged his life so that very few things surprised him. The estate had been in his family for 2 generations. His father had bought it. His mother had made it a home. After both of them were gone, Dominic had kept it the way people keep things that are too large to carry and too important to leave behind. He did not live in it the way a person lives in a home. He used it. He arrived. He slept. He left again. The staff understood this. They understood it the way they understood everything else in that house, quietly, completely, and without being told directly. There were 14 full-time staff members in the house at any given time. 3 in the kitchen, 2 in the grounds, 2 drivers, 2 security personnel who rotated shifts, a personal assistant named Oliver who lived off-site and arrived before anyone else in the morning, and 5 domestic workers who managed the interior of the house under the direction of Mrs. Eleanor Crane. Mrs. Crane was 62 years old. She was not tall, but she carried herself as though height were a minor detail that had simply not been assigned to her, and that she had chosen to ignore. She had white hair, cut short. She wore the same style of clothing every day, dark trousers, a pale blouse, flat shoes, and she moved through the house in a way that suggested she had memorized the distance between every piece of furniture and no longer needed to look down. She had worked for the Hale family for 19 years. She had survived 2 restructurings of staff, 1 family dispute that had briefly threatened to sell the estate, and the particular challenge of managing an employer who was almost never home but had opinions about everything when he was. She was, in the opinion of everyone who worked under her, both the most reasonable and the most exacting person they had ever encountered. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The 5 domestic workers all knew exactly what was expected of them. Nora Voss knew it better than most. She had been hired 8 months ago through a placement agency in the city, one that specialized in placing domestic staff with high-profile households. The agency had been thorough. There had been 2 interviews, a background check that went back 7 years, and a reference call that lasted 45 minutes. Nora had passed all of it. She had arrived at the estate on a Tuesday morning in early spring with a single bag, sensible shoes, and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to enter new places without announcing themselves. She was 23 years old. She had brown hair that she kept pulled back, brown eyes that moved quickly and settled carefully, and hands that were already calloused in the way that hands become when they have been working since they were young. She was not small, but she moved as though she were, economically, without waste, in a way that made her easy to overlook in a room. This was, in her experience, useful. Her first week had been an exercise in memorization. The layout of the house was extensive. 12 rooms on the main floor, 8 on the upper, 3 in the wing that had once been used for guests and was now used for storage and the occasional office meeting. The basement level held the laundry facilities, 2 staff rooms, a wine cellar that was catalogued and locked, and a utility space that was Gerald's domain and that nobody entered without a specific reason. Mrs. Crane had walked Nora through the house on her first day with the efficiency of someone delivering a briefing. Each room had a schedule, each surface had a method, each piece of furniture had a history, whether or not that history was relevant to keeping it clean, because Mrs. Crane believed that understanding the value of a thing was part of caring for it correctly. Nora had listened to all of it. She had taken no notes, because she did not need to. She remembered things. She had always remembered things. This was both a talent and, occasionally, a problem, because she also remembered things she would have preferred to forget. The other domestic workers were Clara Finn, who was 30 and had been at the estate for 3 years and who was cheerful in a way that seemed immune to weather or mood. She had red hair and a habit of narrating small tasks under her breath, not to anyone in particular, just as a way of keeping herself company. Patrick O'Say, who was 27 and handled the heavier cleaning tasks and the moving of furniture, and who was quiet in the deliberate way of someone who has decided that most conversations are not improved by his participation, and who was right about this more often than not. Helen Marsh, who was 54 and who had worked in private households her entire adult life, and who possessed the specific knowledge of someone who has seen the inside of a great many lives, and found them, on the whole, fairly consistent. She knew where everything was, including things that were not supposed to be found. And Nora. The 5 of them managed the house in a rotation that Mrs. Crane had designed with the same logic she applied to everything. Practical, thorough, with built-in redundancy so that if someone was ill or absent, the work continued without visible disruption. The house was designed to run like something mechanical, smooth, predictable, each day unfolding in the same sequence it had unfolded the day before and the day before that. Nora had been good at machinery since she was a child. She was assigned, in her first week, to the east wing and the common areas of the main floor. In her 3rd week, after she had demonstrated to Mrs. Crane's quiet satisfaction that she could move through a room without leaving any trace of her presence other than the fact that it was cleaner than before, she was given additional access to the upper floor, the private rooms. She treated the private rooms with particular care, not because she was told to, because she understood, in the way she understood most things quickly and without being taught, that a person's private space is not just a collection of objects, it is a version of them that they have not chosen to show anyone. Cleaning it required a kind of respect that had nothing to do with the cleaning itself. Mr. Hale's private study was on the upper floor, at the end of the east corridor. It was a large room. A desk that had belonged to his father sat near the window, its surface worn smooth at the edges in the way that old wood becomes when hands have rested on it for years. Bookshelves covered 2 walls. A leather chair sat near a fireplace that was cleaned but never lit. The room smelled of old paper and something that might have been the lingering trace of a particular type of cedar wood polish that had been used on the shelves for so long that it had become part of the room's character. Mr. Hale was almost never in it. He visited the estate on average twice a month, and when he did, he spent most of his time in the main floor office, which was newer, brighter, and wired for the kind of connectivity that his work required. The study upstairs was, by all appearances, a room he used primarily to store the past. Nora cleaned it once a week, on Thursdays. She had, over the course of her 8 months, developed a quiet relationship with the room, not with the man whose room it was. She had met him exactly twice, both times briefly, both times in passing corridors where he had nodded in the direction of the staff who were present without stopping. She had no reason to know him any better than that. She was not the kind of person who developed attachments to employers, particularly employers like this one. But the room itself, the books that were arranged not alphabetically or by subject but in some personal logic that she had spent a long time puzzling over before concluding that they were arranged by when they had been read, earliest to most recent. The room was familiar to her in the comfortable way of a place you return to often enough that you stop needing to think about where things are. She knew the draft that came under the east-facing window when the temperature dropped. She knew that the 3rd shelf from the bottom on the left bookcase had a slight lean that caused anything placed on it to shift gradually toward the right over the course of a week. She knew that the desk lamp had a bulb that flickered once when it was first turned on and then steadied, and that this was not a fault but simply a characteristic of that particular bulb in that particular lamp. She knew the room the way you know a place you have spent real time in. She also knew, because she had asked, carefully and indirectly, during her first month, that Mr. Hale was scheduled to be away. He had a trip, international, a summit of some kind involving infrastructure agreements in several governments, and the kind of meetings that lasted multiple days and required people to fly significant distances. He was not expected back for another week. She knew this. She was cleaning his study on a Thursday morning, working through her usual sequence, dusting the upper shelves first, moving to the lower ones, then the surfaces, then the floor, when she heard the front door. Not the staff entrance. The front door. The front door opened differently from the staff entrance, heavier. The seal of it when it closed sent a sound through the house that the staff entrance did not. Nora had been in this house long enough to know the difference without thinking about it, the same way you learn to recognize the sounds of a particular building until they become a kind of language you speak without trying. She stopped, stood very still with the cloth in her hand. Below her, through the floor, she heard the sound of footsteps moving through the entrance hall. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Not Gerald, not Patrick, not the particular light-footed pace of Oliver the assistant, who moved quickly and on the balls of his feet because he was always moving between tasks. These were the footsteps of someone who moved at their own speed because they were not aware of needing to move at anyone else's. She heard Mrs. Crane's voice, distantly, from somewhere on the main floor, a greeting. Composed, steady, the way Mrs. Crane's voice always was, but with the particular slight elevation of surprise that Nora had learned to hear in it. And then she heard nothing for a moment, and then footsteps again, and then she understood. He was not supposed to be here. He was not supposed to be home for another 4 days. She looked at the room around her, the dusting cloth in her hand, the half-cleaned upper shelf, the chair she had moved 3 feet to the left to access the floor beneath it. The small evidence of her presence scattered through a room she was absolutely authorized to be in, a room she cleaned every Thursday, a room that was, on any other Thursday, completely empty when she arrived. She looked at the door. She listened to the footsteps on the stairs. She had approximately 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, she did not reach for the chair to move it back. She did not try to gather her cleaning supplies and flatten herself against the wall behind the door. She did not freeze, though the instinct was there, familiar and old, the one that said, make yourself small, make yourself nothing, disappear into the background until the danger has passed. She did not do any of those things. She stood in the center of the room, and she thought very quickly about the only thing in the room that mattered, and she moved toward the armchair near the window instead. Not away from it, toward it. Because behind that armchair, wrapped in Nora's own uniform jacket, with her cheek pressed against the armrest and her small fist curled around a paper crane, a 4-year-old girl named Emmy was fast asleep, and she had been sleeping there for 6 days. And Nora Voss had 3 seconds left before the door opened, and she did the only thing she could think to do. She turned to face the door. She put her finger to her lips. The handle turned. The door swung open. Dominic Hale stood in the doorway. He was taller than she remembered from the corridor encounters. He had the look of a man who had been traveling, not disheveled, because she did not think this particular man became disheveled, but worn in the way that long flights and longer meetings wear a person down to something more basic than their professional surface. His coat was still on. He was carrying something, a folder of documents, thick, the kind that suggested the summit had sent him home with more work, not less. He looked at the room. He looked at her. His expression did not change in any dramatic way. It was the expression of a man who had walked into a room he expected to find empty and found it occupied, and who was processing this fact with the same level of visible reaction he might give to a minor change in weather. Then he looked, very briefly, at the armchair by the window. Not because he had heard anything. Because Nora was standing between him and the armchair, not in front of the shelf she was supposed to be cleaning, and this was the kind of small displacement that a man who had built 3 companies from nothing noticed without knowing he had noticed it. His gaze came back to her. She did not move. She did not speak. Her finger was still raised to her lips. And in the doorway of his own private study, in a house that ran on his name and his money and the quiet force of his expectation, Dominic Hale stood perfectly still, and said nothing, and looked at the young woman who had just, without a single word of explanation, told him to be quiet in his own home. The clock on the wall counted 3 seconds, then 5, then 8. Outside the window a bird crossed the sky. The fountain in the driveway continued its soft, endless sound. Dominic Hale did not move from the doorway. His eyes had settled on her face with the particular focus of a man who is very accustomed to understanding situations quickly, and who has just encountered one that is not, at first reading, fully readable. Nora held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not look at the armchair. She did not blink any more than she had to. She simply waited, with the kind of stillness that does not come from calm so much as from the decision, made a long time ago, that panic is a luxury she cannot afford. She had made this decision before, in other rooms, in other situations. The specifics were different. The essential logic was the same. You held yourself steady. You looked at the thing directly. You waited for the next moment, and then the one after, because the only way forward was through, and there was no point in looking for the door you already knew was behind you. Dominic Hale, in all of his 41 years and all of his built companies and all of his international agreements, had not been told to be quiet by a member of his own domestic staff. He was, by any objective measure, not a man who waited for instructions from other people. He waited. Behind the armchair, Emmy shifted slightly in her sleep. A small sound, the kind that children make when they are very deeply asleep and dreaming something slow and warm. Not a cry, not a sound that would carry through a door. But in the stillness of the room, in the particular thick silence that had settled since the door opened, it was audible. Dominic heard it. His eyes moved, just slightly, toward the armchair, then back to Nora. She watched his face change, not dramatically, not in a way that another person might have caught, but she was looking at him carefully, and she saw the moment when the situation went from being a puzzle to being something else entirely, something that required a different kind of attention. He took one step into the room. She did not move back. He stopped. They looked at each other across the length of his private study, in a house that ran on silence and order, and the principle that everything should be in its correct place. And Nora Voss thought very clearly, whatever happens next, she is not moving from that chair. Nobody moved first. That was the strange thing about those seconds. In a situation like that, a man who owned the room, a woman who was not supposed to be in it alone, a sound that had come from behind a chair, you might expect one person to take charge immediately, to speak, to demand an explanation, to step forward and establish the kind of order that power is supposed to restore. Dominic Hale did none of those things. He stood where he was, just inside the doorway, his coat still on, the folder still in his hand. His eyes had gone to the armchair and come back to Nora, and the thing that settled in his expression was not anger. It was the look of a man who has learned, through a great deal of experience, that the moments just before understanding are the ones where most people make their worst mistakes, and who has decided, some time ago, to wait a little longer than feels comfortable before making his. Nora understood this about him without having spent any real time in his presence. She understood it the way you understand things about people when you have cleaned their private spaces long enough. The books arranged by when they were read, earliest to most recent. The desk with the worn edges. The folder in his hand right now, which she could see contained not one but 3 different colored tab systems, because a man who built companies from nothing did not trust a single organizational method for things that mattered. He was not impulsive. He was thorough. He was patient in the way that is not softness but strategy. She had been counting on this, though she had not known she was counting on it until right now. Emmy made another small sound behind the chair, this one slightly longer. A child rearranging herself in sleep, pulling the jacket tighter without waking. Nora heard it the way you hear the sounds of someone you have been caring for, with a specific attention that other people do not have, attuned to the difference between a sound that requires action and a sound that only requires listening. This one required only listening. She turned her gaze back to Dominic and held it there. He looked at her for another moment, then he did something she had not expected. He set the folder down on the nearest available surface, the corner of the bookshelf closest to the door, and he moved his hand in a single, brief gesture. Small, downward, quiet, the kind of gesture that means understood without saying a word. Then he stepped back. He stepped fully back into the corridor and pulled the door almost closed behind him. Not completely closed, almost. Just enough that the room was separated from the hallway without being sealed from it. Nora stood in the center of the study and let out a breath that she had been holding so quietly that she had not noticed she was holding it. She waited 30 seconds. Then she went to the armchair. Emmy was still asleep. She was curled on her side, her knees tucked up, her cheek creased from the fabric of the armrest. She had been sleeping on improvised surfaces for long enough now that she slept wherever she landed, in the boneless, immediate way that only very young children can sleep, as if the act of closing their eyes is sufficient to make any surface into a bed. She had dark hair, cut unevenly in the way that happens when someone who is not a hairdresser has trimmed it with the best intention and imperfect execution. Her shoes were near the leg of the chair, lined up neatly, because Nora had made lining up shoes into a game early on, a way of establishing small habits that might help Emmy feel that some things were in order, even when most things were not. She looked at the door. Then she looked at the child. Then she went to the door and opened it. Dominic Hale was standing in the corridor. He had not gone anywhere. His coat was still on, which told her that he had not yet spoken to anyone downstairs, because Mrs. Crane would have immediately moved to take it. He was leaning against the opposite wall with his arms loosely at his sides, not in the posture of someone who is waiting to be angry, but in the posture of someone who is simply waiting. He looked at her when she opened the door. She stepped into the corridor and pulled the door to again, leaving it open a few inches so she could hear if Emmy woke. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, quietly, "How long?" 2 words. Just that. She had prepared, in the compressed few moments since he had stepped back into the corridor, for several possible versions of this conversation. A demand that she explain herself. A statement that she was going to be dismissed. A series of questions delivered in the manner of someone who is in control of the situation and demonstrating it. She had prepared for all of these. She had not quite prepared for 2 words delivered in a tone that was not accusatory or cold, or even particularly surprised, just direct, quiet. The question of a person who wants to understand something before they decide what to do about it. 3 months, she said. He looked at her. His expression did not change dramatically. Something moved through it. She could not have named it with precision, and then settled. "Whose child?" he said. "Her name is Emmy," Nora said. "Her mother worked here, in the kitchen." She watched him process this. She could see him placing it. The kitchen staff, the timeline, the fact that a child had been living in his house for 3 months without his knowledge or his housekeeper's. "Lena," he said. It was not a question. He had remembered the name. Nora had not expected that either. "Yes," she said. "She left," he said. 3 months ago. She was made to leave, Nora said. She kept her voice level. There was someone she owed money to, someone who had ways of making things difficult. She didn't have a choice and she didn't have time. She left Emmy in the service corridor with her bag and her shoes. I found her at 2 in the morning. Dominic was quiet for a moment. "You found her," he said. "Yes. At 2 in the morning. Yes. And you decided to..." He stopped, looked at the door, looked back at her. "In my study. It's the one room on this floor," Nora said, "that no one enters on a schedule except me. Mrs. Crane doesn't come up here unless there's a specific reason. The other staff don't have routine access. You weren't expected home for another 4 days. It was the safest room in the house." She waited to see how he received this, the logic of it, the fact that she had, quite deliberately, used her understanding of his household, the schedule, the access patterns, the absence of the man who owned everything, to create a hiding place for a child in the center of his private space. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Bring her out." Nora went back into the study. She moved quietly to the armchair and crouched down. She touched Emmy's shoulder, the lightest possible touch, the one that means I'm here, nothing is wrong. And Emmy opened her eyes. She had the particular look of a young child waking up in a place she has grown used to, not alarmed, not confused, just returning slowly from wherever she had been. "Hey," Nora said, "time to wake up." Emmy sat up. She looked at Nora, and then she looked past Nora at the door, which was standing open now, and at the figure in the corridor beyond it. She did not cry. She did not shrink back. She looked at Dominic Hale the way young children look at unfamiliar adults, with a frank assessment that has not yet learned to be polite about its thoroughness. Then she held up the paper crane. It was a small gesture, not directed at him specifically. Just something she did when she woke up, holding it up to the light, checking it was still there. Dominic looked at the paper crane. Then he looked at Nora. Then he said, "My office, downstairs, when she's settled." He picked up the folder from the shelf where he had placed it. He walked down the corridor toward the stairs. He did not look back. Nora listened to his footsteps descend. Then she sat down on the floor beside the armchair and let Emmy climb into her lap, which was what Emmy did every morning after waking, without fail, as if it were a procedure that had to be completed before the day could begin. She was not sure, in that moment, what was going to happen next. She was not sure whether downstairs meant a conversation or a termination, or something else entirely. She was not sure whether what she had done, what she had been doing for 3 months, was about to be treated as a crisis or a problem, or simply a fact that had to be managed. She was sure of one thing. She had not moved from between Emmy and the door. She was still sure of this. She sat on the floor of Dominic Hale's private study with a 4-year-old in her lap and a paper crane on the armrest beside her, and she thought about Lena. Lena had been in the kitchen for 2 years before Nora arrived. She was the kind of person who filled a room without meaning to, not because she was loud, but because she was warm. The kind of warmth that moves outward naturally, the way heat moves from a fire, because it cannot help it. She had a laugh that started low and moved up, and she laughed often, and when she laughed, other people in the vicinity found themselves looking toward it involuntarily. She had come to this country when Emmy was 1 year old, on a work visa that had been arranged by a man she had trusted, and that had turned out to be more complicated than it appeared. The man had helped her, and then the man had decided that helping her entitled him to things she had not agreed to give, and when she had pushed back, the situation had developed edges. Nora did not know all of this immediately. She had learned it in pieces, over the months. From things Emmy said, in the disorganized, non-chronological way that young children report information. From the bag Lena had left behind, which Nora had gone through carefully, looking for anything that might help her understand where Lena had gone, and whether she was safe. The bag had contained 2 changes of clothing for Emmy, a battered stuffed rabbit with one button eye, a small Ziploc bag of crackers, a note written in a handwriting that was rushed and slanted, and a prepaid phone. The note had said, in handwriting that became less controlled as it went, "Take care of her. I will come back. I promise I will come back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please." The prepaid phone had had 2 contacts in it. One was a number that Nora had tried 3 times in the first week, and that had rung without being answered. The other was a name that Nora did not recognize, a man's name, and she had not called that one. She had understood, from the note and from the bag, and from the general shape of the situation, that not all of the people connected to Lena's departure were people Nora should make contact with on Emmy's behalf. She had kept the phone. She had tried the first number again, twice more, in the weeks after. Nothing. She had, in the meantime, been feeding Emmy from her own meals. She had been collecting food from the kitchen, small things, things that would not be noticed as missing, and bringing it upstairs. She had been managing Emmy's sleep schedule around the cleaning roster, making sure the child was in the study, before Nora began her Thursday rounds, tucked safely behind the armchair. She had been answering, in the most non-specific terms she could manage, the questions that Emmy asked, in the way that 4-year-olds ask questions, endlessly, without warning, in the middle of other things. Where is my mom? Will she come? Is she coming today? Is today a day she comes? What about tomorrow? What about after tomorrow? Nora had said, "I don't know, but I'm looking. I'm going to find her." This had been sufficient, most days, because Emmy trusted Nora in the complete and uncomplicated way that very young children trust the person who has fed them and kept them warm and sat with them in the dark. Was not earned trust in the adult sense. It was simply the trust that happens when someone has been consistently present. Nora did not find it a light thing to be trusted this way. She had found it, from the first night, a weight that she carried very carefully, because she understood what happened when someone set it down. Emmy patted Nora's hand now, sitting in her lap. "Is it breakfast?" Emmy asked. "Almost," Nora said, "in a minute." "Is there toast?" "I'll find out." "The kind without the seeds?" "Yes," Nora said, "the kind without the seeds." She sat for another moment, then she helped Emmy into her shoes, tied them, the rabbit tucked under Emmy's arm, and stood up. Downstairs, somewhere in the main floor office, Dominic Hale was sitting with a folder of documents from a summit that had not gone the way anyone had planned, in a house he had come back to 4 days early, and he was waiting for a conversation with a 23-year-old maid who had, without his knowledge or permission, turned his private study into a sanctuary. Nora picked up her cleaning cloth from the shelf where she had left it. She looked at the room, the half-dusted shelf, the chair still 3 feet from its usual position, the small hollow in the leather armrest where a child had been sleeping. She thought, briefly and without drama, that she should probably finish the dusting, not because it was Thursday and the room was on her schedule, but because it was the right thing to do, and because she had learned a long time ago that when things are uncertain, you do the next correct thing in front of you and you keep your hands steady. She did not finish the dusting. She picked up Emmy's hand instead. They went downstairs together. At the bottom of the stairs, Clara was crossing the entrance hall with a stack of folded linens. She looked up. She saw Nora. She saw the child. Her expression went through several phases very quickly. Recognition, confusion, a rapid private recalculation, and then she said nothing and kept walking, because Clara Finn had been in enough private households to know that the things you did not see were sometimes the things you were best protected by not having seen. At the door of the main floor office, Nora stopped. She adjusted Emmy's rabbit for her. She straightened her own collar. Then she knocked. "Come in," said Dominic's voice. She opened the door. He was at the desk. Coat off now, jacket still on. The folder was open in front of him, but he was not reading it. He was looking at the door. When she came in, when he saw that she had brought Emmy with her, something shifted in his expression, not surprise. He had told her to settle the child first, and she had not, and she could see him noting this. He looked at Emmy. Emmy looked at him. She held up the paper crane again. He looked at it for a moment. "Sit down," he said. Not to Nora, to both of them. There were 2 chairs in front of the desk. Nora took one. Emmy, without being directed, climbed onto the other one, and sat with her back very straight, and the rabbit in her lap and the crane in her hand, in the posture of a child who has been in enough adult rooms to understand that sitting quietly is the correct strategy until further information is available. She looked at Dominic. He looked at her. Then he looked at Nora and said, "Tell me everything." And Nora, who had spent 3 months managing this situation in silence, alone, with no one to tell, looked at the man across the desk and started at the beginning. She told him about the service corridor first. Not because it was where the story began. It was not really, because the story that led to that corridor went back further than Nora had been able to piece together fully. But the corridor was where Nora's part of it began, and she told it the way she told most things, plainly, in sequence, without excess. It had been a Thursday night, late, past midnight. She had come down to the laundry room to retrieve a set of linens she had left in the dryer because she had forgotten them when her shift ended, and she wanted them ready for the following morning. The service corridor connected the staff quarters to the utility areas in the basement, and it was not a corridor anyone used in the middle of the night. It was lit by a single strip of fluorescent light that buzzed very slightly, and that no one had replaced because no one was ever in it at that hour. She had heard the sound before she saw anything, a sound too small to identify from a distance. She had stopped walking. She had listened, and then she had followed it to the far end of the corridor, near the exterior door that opened onto the back of the estate grounds, and she had found Emmy. She had been sitting on a green canvas duffel bag, one shoe on, the other beside her. Her eyes were open, but she was not crying, which was somehow more difficult to look at than crying would have been. She was wearing a yellow jacket with a hood, and she was holding the stuffed rabbit by one ear, and she was just sitting there in the buzzing light, waiting for something in the specific way of someone who has been told that someone will come, and who is holding on to that. Nora had crouched down in front of her. She had said, "Hey, I'm Nora. What's your name?" The girl had looked at her for a moment. Then she had said, "Emmy. How long have you been here, Emmy?" Emmy had considered this with the seriousness that the question apparently deserved. "A long time," she had said. "My mum said to wait." "Is your mum coming back?" Emmy had looked at the door, then back at Nora. "She said to wait," she had said again. Nora had sat down on the floor of the service corridor, her back against the wall, because it was 2 in the morning, and the child was 4 years old, and she was alone, and the only honest thing to do was to be next to her. She had stayed there for an hour. During that hour, she had let Emmy eat the crackers from the Ziploc bag. She had found the note and the phone in the duffel bag. She had read the note once and then put it back because it was not her note to read more than once, but she had understood what it said and what it meant. She had tried the first number on the phone and listened to it ring. She had looked at the second contact name and made the decision not to call it. Then she had picked up the bag and taken Emmy upstairs. She had told no one. She had thought about telling someone. She had gone through the options the way she went through most problems, systematically, testing each one. She could tell Mrs. Crane. Mrs. Crane would do what was correct and sensible and what the situation called for, which would mean involving the appropriate authorities. The appropriate authorities, in Nora's experience, meant a system that would move quickly on certain parts of the problem and slowly on others, and the parts it moved slowly on were frequently the parts that mattered most to the people inside the situation. A 4-year-old child with a mother who had left under uncertain circumstances and a legal status that Nora did not know enough about to assess. Nora had seen what the system did with situations like this. She had seen it up close. She was not prepared to make Emmy part of a file before she had tried every other option. She could tell Oliver, the personal assistant. Oliver was efficient and thorough, and would also do what was correct and sensible. Same outcome. She could try to find Lena herself. She had chosen the third option. Not because she was confident it would work, because it was the option that kept Emmy in the safest position she could offer until something better presented itself, and because Nora had learned, over the course of her life, that waiting for a better option to appear without doing anything was not actually a strategy. It was just waiting. She had moved Emmy into her room in the staff quarters for the first 2 nights. This had worked, but it was not sustainable. The staff quarters were cleaned on a weekly rotation, and Helen Marsh was scheduled to clean Nora's room on Saturday morning. Nora had moved Emmy to the study on Thursday evening. Her access was established, her schedule was known. It was the most controlled space she had, and she had made the armchair into something reasonable with the uniform jacket and a folded towel. She had established a routine. She was, as a person, someone who understood the value of routine. Dominic listened to all of this without interrupting. He sat back in his chair, very still. Nora had expected him to stop her at various points, to ask clarifying questions, to push back on particular decisions. He did not. He listened the way she imagined he read those folders, thoroughly, in the right order, without jumping ahead. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Emmy, across the desk, had produced a second paper crane from somewhere. Nora did not know when she had made it. She had apparently been folding them independently, and was examining the relationship between the two of them with great concentration. The man she owed money to, Dominic said. Do you know his name? I have a contact in the phone, Nora said. I didn't call it. I didn't know if it was safe. Why didn't you? Because I didn't know who would pick up, and I didn't know what he'd do if he found out where Emmy was. Dominic nodded, once. Processing. The first number, he said. The one you called. Did it ever answer? No, but it rang differently in the last 2 weeks. At first it went straight to voicemail. Then it started ringing. That either means the phone was turned back on or someone else now has it, he said. Yes. He looked at the phone that Nora had placed on the edge of his desk when she sat down. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way he had looked at the room upstairs, with the focused attention of someone determining what something is, before deciding what to do about it. Then he looked at Emmy. Emmy looked back at him. Do you know where your mum went? He asked her. His voice, when he spoke to her, changed in a way that was not dramatic but was noticeable. It did not go soft in the performed way that some adults do when they speak to children, flattening their tone into something artificial. It simply went direct. He spoke to her the way he had spoken to Nora, as if she were someone who might have information worth hearing. Emmy considered this seriously. She went to get something fixed, she said. She said it needed to be fixed. What needed to be fixed? Emmy shrugged with her whole body. She didn't say. She said she'd be back when it was fixed. She looked at her crane. It must be very broken. Something moved across Dominic's face, there and gone. Yes, he said. It must be. He stood up. He walked to the window that overlooked the side garden and stood with his hands in his pockets, looking out. Nora watched his back and waited. You've been doing this for 3 months, he said. To the window. Yes. On your own. Yes. While doing your job. Yes. She paused. Then, because it seemed like the right thing to say, rather than the safe thing, I wasn't planning to do it indefinitely. I was trying to find her mother. I'm still trying. He turned around. You're still trying, he repeated. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, What have you tried? She told him. The phone. A community support organization in the city that she had contacted anonymously, asking whether they had any channels for locating individuals who had left under difficult circumstances. The organization had been helpful up to a point, but their resources were limited, and their information was slow. She had also, and this was the part she told him most carefully, watching his expression, made discreet contact with a woman she knew from her previous employment, a woman who worked in a different kind of domestic setting, and who had a wider network than Nora did, and who had agreed to ask some questions in the right directions. None of it had produced Lena. But someone somewhere knows where she is, Nora said. People don't disappear completely. They go somewhere, and if someone made her leave, that person knows where. Dominic looked at the phone on the desk again. Have you eaten? He said, not to Nora, to Emmy. Emmy looked up. Not yet, she said. Nora said toast, without the seeds. He crossed to the door and opened it. Mrs. Crane was in the entrance hall. She had been moving through the morning's revised schedule with the controlled focus of someone who had not yet fully processed that the employer was home 4 days early, and that this required everything to be reconfigured. She looked up when the office door opened. Mrs. Crane, he said, could you have something sent in here for the child, please? Toast. Whatever she'd like. Mrs. Crane looked at the office doorway. She could see, past Dominic, into the room. She could see Nora. She could see, presumably, the small figure at the chair in front of the desk. Her expression went through the same rapid series of phases that Clara's had in the entrance hall, and like Clara, she completed them quickly and arrived at the other side with her composure intact. Of course, she said, right away. She went toward the kitchen. Dominic came back into the office and sat down again. Oliver will be here in 40 minutes, he said. I'd like you to be here when he arrives. He has access to resources that are relevant to this situation. If there's a way to locate Lena, he'll find it faster than anything you've tried. Nora was quiet for a moment. What happens to Emmy while you're looking? She asked. She stays here, he said. Simply, as if this were not a statement that required any particular consideration. Nora looked at him. He looked back at her. You've been managing this for 3 months, he said. Another few days isn't a crisis. I'm not going to put a 4-year-old in an official process while we have a faster option in front of us. She had not expected this. She had braced, in the walk from the study to this office, for a number of possible outcomes, and she had arranged them in her mind roughly in order of likelihood. She had expected, at the high end, dismissal with a good reference and the quiet instruction that Emmy would be handled appropriately. She had expected, in the middle range, some form of discussion about what the correct official steps were. She had not, anywhere in her calculation, landed on, "She stays here," said with the tone of someone stating a logistical fact. She realized, sitting across the desk from him, that she had made the same mistake that most people apparently made about Dominic Hale. She had looked at the house, and the gate that opened before the car stopped, and the fountain that ran in winter because silence felt like neglect. And she had built a picture of him from all of that, which was a picture of someone for whom the correct operation of machinery was the primary concern. She had been only partly right. The machinery mattered to him, the order mattered. But underneath that, or alongside it, or threaded through it in some way she had not expected, was something else. Something that had made him crouch down to the height of a sleeping child in the doorway of his own study. Something that had put him on the floor with a folder of summit documents still in his hand, and asked 2 words very quietly. How long? She did not know what to do with this, entirely. She filed it. All right, she said. There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Crane entered with a tray, toast, cut into triangles, without seeds, a small glass of orange juice, a napkin folded into a shape that was not quite a bird but was attempting to be one, which was the kind of thing Mrs. Crane did automatically, and which she probably did not even know she had done. She set the tray on the edge of the desk. She looked at Emmy. Emmy looked at the toast. "Thank you," Emmy said, with the perfect politeness of a child who has been carefully taught it. Mrs. Crane's expression did something complicated and then resolved into something softer than anything Nora had seen on her face in 8 months. "You're welcome," she said, and she left. Nora watched Emmy eat. She watched the orange juice go down in 3 long swallows. She watched the rabbit get propped against the arm of the chair so that Emmy could eat with both hands. She watched the crane be placed very carefully on the corner of Dominic's desk, in a clear space, set down with the kind of deliberateness that said, "This is important, it goes here." Dominic looked at the crane on his desk. He did not move it. Outside the window, the grounds were in their usual order, the hedges trimmed, the gravel raked, the fountain running, everything in its correct place. Except the one thing that was not. Or the 2 things, depending on how you counted. Oliver arrived at 43 minutes past the hour he had been expected. Nora knew this because there was a clock on the wall of the office, and she had been watching it in the particular way you watch clocks when you are waiting for something to happen, and you are not entirely sure whether what happens next will be good. Oliver Pritchard was 35, with the kind of energy that made him seem perpetually mid-sentence. He was tall, quick-moving, and had the particular quality of someone who has built their entire professional life around making other people's complex situations manageable. He carried a laptop under one arm and a phone in his hand, and he walked into the office without knocking, because in 9 years of working for Dominic Hale, Oliver had learned that Dominic did not require knocking from him. He required results. He stopped when he saw Emmy. The stop lasted less than a second. Then he looked at Dominic, who gave him a very brief version of what he needed to know with the economy of 2 people who have worked together long enough to communicate in partial information. Dominic said 3 sentences. Oliver nodded twice. Then he sat down in the remaining chair, opened his laptop, and looked at Nora. "Walk me through everything you know about the mother," he said, "and I need that phone." Nora walked him through it again. It was faster the second time, because she knew which details mattered. Oliver typed while she talked. He asked questions that were pointed and specific and that told her, without his needing to say so, that he had done this kind of thing before, located people, followed connections through networks that were not designed to be followed. He asked about dates. He asked about what Lena had told Nora in the weeks before she disappeared. He asked about the man Lena had owed money to, whether she had ever used a name, whether Nora had heard anyone else in the household mention a name in that context. "She mentioned a first name once," Nora said. "Gordon." She said it once in the kitchen, to one of the other staff. She said Gordon's patience was running out. I didn't know who she meant at the time. Oliver looked up from his laptop. He and Dominic exchanged a look. "What?" Nora said. "It's not nothing," Oliver said. He went back to typing. "It narrows things significantly." She did not ask further. She understood that some things became less useful once too many people were asking about them out loud. Emmy, having finished her toast, had climbed down from the chair and was sitting on the floor near the window, arranging her 2 cranes on the carpet in some complex spatial relationship that was not yet clear, but that she was clearly working toward. Dominic watched her for a moment. Then he looked at Nora. "You've been putting half your wages aside for her," he said. It was not phrased as a question. He had, at some point, spoken to Mrs. Crane, or had noticed something, or had simply added up the details in the way he added up everything. Nora did not deny it. I needed to make sure she had what she needed. From your own salary, it was available. He was quiet for a moment, then, your brother is in a medical program. She looked at him. Yes. The costs are significant. She kept her expression level. I manage. He looked at her for a moment with the focused attention he gave to things he was assessing. She did not look away. Mrs. Crane will set up the guest room in the East Wing for tonight, he said. For Emmy. So she's not on the floor of my study. I know where she's been, he said, not unkindly. She'll be more comfortable in the guest room. Nora looked at Emmy on the floor, arranging her cranes. She might need me nearby, she said, at night. Then you'll be nearby, he said, as if this too were a logistical fact. She looked at him again. This man in his coat now folded over the back of his chair in the house that ran like machinery, who had come home 4 days early from a summit that had not gone well and had found a child asleep in his private study and had not, at any point in the past 2 hours, raised his voice. She was beginning to understand that she had been very wrong about what kind of person he was. Not wrong about the house, or the order, or the gate that opened before the car stopped. Those things were all true, but she had read them as the whole picture, and they were not. She had been wrong before about people, usually in the other direction, reading kindness into surfaces that did not have it underneath. She was not sure, yet, which kind of mistake she was making now. She filed that too. Outside, Oliver was on his phone now, speaking quietly. Emmy had gotten her cranes into whatever arrangement she had been working toward and sat back to look at them. The fountain ran. The hedges stood in their correct positions. And somewhere outside this estate, in a city or a room or a situation that Nora had spent 3 months trying to find, Lena was waiting for something to be fixed. Nora intended to find her before the day was over. She looked at Oliver and his laptop and the specific posture of someone who has resources and is deploying them. She thought, maybe now they had a chance. Oliver found the first thread at 11:47 in the morning. Nora knew the exact time because she had been watching the clock again, sitting in a chair near the door of the office with Emmy on her lap and a book that Mrs. Crane had appeared with. A children's picture book about a small bear who builds a house, which Mrs. Crane had produced from somewhere in the house without explanation, which meant that somewhere in this estate there had always been a children's book, waiting on a shelf, for a child who hadn't arrived yet. Oliver said, there, quietly, to no one in particular. Dominic looked up from his own work. He had a second desk surface, a long one along the side wall, where he had arranged the summit documents, and he had been reading through them steadily since the first conversation concluded, because he was not a man who stopped working because other things were happening. He was a man who ran both at the same time. Oliver turned the laptop around. Dominic looked at it. His face didn't change. He said one word. When? 6 weeks ago, Oliver said. Different name, but it's her. The profile photo is her. Nora had heard all of this from across the room, and she was already moving. She transferred Emmy to the chair, with the bear book, with the instruction to keep reading, and she crossed to where Oliver was sitting. On the laptop screen was a community support forum page. One of those pages that exist in every city, set up by people who know that the official channels move slowly and have decided to build something faster alongside them. It was in a language that Nora did not read, but Oliver had translated the key part into a note beside the screen. A woman named Lena, posted under a different name but with a profile photo that was unmistakably her, a photo that Nora recognized immediately as one that had been on the wall of the kitchen. A birthday photo, someone's birthday, had posted in this forum 7 weeks ago, asking for information about a particular kind of support service. And in the responses to her post, 6 weeks ago, someone had replied with an address, a service organization, in the eastern part of the city. Oliver had the address open in another tab. She may or may not still be there, he said. These places don't hold people for extended periods, but someone there will know where she went next. Nora looked at the screen. She looked at the photograph. Lena's face, warm and direct and captured in a moment that had no idea what was coming after it. She looked at Dominic. He was already looking at her. I'll need to go there, she said. Oliver will go, Dominic said. She doesn't know Oliver, Nora said. If she's there, or if anyone there knows her, they'll be protective. They should be protective. That's the point of a place like that. Someone she doesn't know walking in asking questions. She stopped, chose the next words carefully. She knows me. She'll know that I have Emmy. That's what matters. The room was quiet for a moment. Oliver looked at Dominic. Dominic looked at Nora. She held it. He said, "Oliver goes with you." "All right," she said. "And you call when you're there, when you're inside, and when you have information." "All right." He stood up. He picked up the phone on his desk, not the prepaid phone that Nora had brought, which was still in its corner, but his own, and he called someone. He spoke for 2 minutes, gave an address, and said to make themselves available. When he hung up, he said to Nora, "There will be a car at the front in 5 minutes. Oliver knows the driver." Nora looked at Emmy, who had gotten to the part of the bear book where the bear's house falls down in a storm, and who was studying this development with the gravity it deserved. "She'll be here," Dominic said. He had followed her gaze. "She'll be fine. She doesn't do well with uncertainty," Nora said. "If she asks where I am, I'll tell her you went to find her mother," he said. Nora looked at him. "That's what you're doing," he said, simply. She looked at Emmy one more time. Then she went. The car was black and large and warm in the way that expensive cars are warm, not just heated but insulated against the world in some indefinable way, as if outside noise and cold had both agreed to stop at the door. Oliver got in beside her and opened his laptop again, pulling up satellite images of the street they were heading to. He did this with the fluency of someone for whom all of this was just another problem with a geography. Nora sat with her hands in her lap and looked out the window as the city moved past. She thought about Lena. She thought about the service corridor and the buzzing light and a child with one shoe on, waiting. She thought about 3 months of managing something that should not have been hers to manage, and the particular exhaustion of being the only person who knows a secret, and the particular weight of being trusted by someone who does not fully understand the situation they are trusting you with. Emmy trusted her. Fully, without condition. This was its own kind of responsibility. The car moved through the city. Oliver said, at some point, "She'll be there." "You don't know that," Nora said. "No," he said. "But the other possibility is that she's not there, and someone there knows where she is, and that's almost as useful. The threat exists. I found it. We follow it." She looked at him. He looked at his laptop. "How many times," she said, "have you done this kind of thing?" He considered the question without looking up. Defined broadly, more than I can count. Defined as looking for a missing person while someone waits in a house. 3 times. 2 good outcomes. 1. He stopped. 2 good outcomes. She did not ask about the third. The car stopped. They were in front of a building that was modest in the way of places that run on charity and goodwill rather than funding. Clean, functional, a little tired. A sign by the door gave a name in 3 languages. 2 women were talking on the step outside. They looked at the car and at Oliver and Nora as they got out, with the particular watchful attention of people whose job involves knowing quickly whether a new arrival is a person in need or a person who will create a different kind of problem. Nora walked up to them. She said, in as direct a way as she could, "I'm looking for a woman named Lena. She has a daughter. The daughter is safe. She's with me. I need to find her mother." The 2 women looked at each other. One of them said, "Come inside." Inside was a large room with tables and chairs and several people of different ages sitting in various configurations. A kitchen at the back with the smell of something warm. A notice board covered in papers and printed flyers and handwritten notes, layered over each other in the way of notice boards that have been accumulating for years. The woman who had invited them in, she gave her name as Frances, firmly, as though establishing ground rules, brought them to a table in the corner, and sat down across from them with the posture of someone who is going to hear them out before she says anything. Nora spoke first. She gave the version of the story that she gave to Dominic in the office, but compressed. The corridor, the child, 3 months, the phone, the contact name. She laid it out in 2 minutes, watching Frances's face as she did. Frances listened the way Mrs. Crane listened, thoroughly, without comment. When Nora finished, Frances said, "Show me." "Show you what?" "Something that proves what you're saying. Something that puts you with the child." Nora took out her own phone. She opened her photos. She had not taken many, deliberately. Photographs created evidence, and she had been living for 3 months in a situation that required a kind of discretion. But she had taken a few. She had taken them because Emmy was 4 years old and the days were passing and someone should have a record of them. She handed Frances the phone. Frances looked at the screen. She scrolled. She stopped on one photo. Emmy asleep in the armchair, the crane in her fist. Nora's uniform jacket over her like a blanket. The light through the study window in the early morning, soft and ordinary. Frances looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she stood up and said, "Wait here." She went to the back of the room. She spoke briefly to a young man at a desk. She went through a door. She was gone for 4 minutes. Nora counted them. And then she came back. She sat down. She said, "Lena is in a safe place. She has been trying to get back to her daughter for 2 months. The situation that made her leave was more complicated than she could explain in a note written in a hurry. She has been afraid to make contact because she was not sure it was safe for the child." Nora felt something release in her chest. Not dramatically, just a loosening of something that had been pulled taut for a long time. "Is she all right?" she said. "She is not all right in the way that a person is not all right when they have been separated from their child for 3 months, Francis said. "But she is physically safe. She is here. She has been here for 5 weeks. Oliver said nothing. He had been sitting very still throughout this entire exchange, which was, Nora thought, exactly the right thing to do. "Can I speak to her?" Nora said. Francis looked at her for another moment. Then she stood up again. "Come with me," she said. The door at the back of the room led to a short corridor, then another door, then a small room with a window that looked onto a narrow courtyard, and a table, and 2 chairs, and a woman sitting in one of them who looked up when the door opened and whose face did not change for 1 full second, while she determined whether what she was seeing was real. And then Lena said, "Emmy." Not a question. A word that came out of her like a breath she had been holding for 3 months. "She's safe," Nora said. "She's at the estate. She's fine. She had toast this morning without the seeds. She has her rabbit. She made 2 paper cranes today." Lena put her hands over her face. She did not make any sound for a moment. Then she took her hands down, and her face was wet. And she looked at Nora with an expression that was so large it did not fit in the room. And she said, "You kept her." "Yes," Nora said. "For 3 months." "Yes." Lena looked at her. She looked at the table. She looked at her own hands. Then she said, "How is she? Does she ask?" "Every morning," Nora said. "She asks every morning. I told her you went to get something fixed and that I was looking. She said it must be very broken." Lena made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else. "It was," she said. "It was very broken." Nora sat down across from her. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me what happened. We have people now who can help." And Lena looked at her, at this woman she had worked alongside briefly, in passing, 8 months ago, who had found her daughter in a service corridor at 2 in the morning, and had said nothing to anyone, and had kept her safe for 3 months in the one room nobody would look, and she started to tell her. The story Lena told was not simple. Simple would have been easier to fix. She had come to this country 3 years ago on a work arrangement managed through a contact she had met through a family friend. The man's name was Gordon Flint. He was in his 50s, with an operation that was, on its surface, a domestic placement agency. He matched workers with households, took a fee, and appeared to be a legitimate business. The work visa he had arranged for Lena was genuine. The position at the Hale estate was genuine. Everything, for the first 8 months, was genuine. And then Lena had made the mistake of asking to have her employment contract reviewed by someone she trusted, because she had started to understand that certain clauses in it were not standard, and that certain deductions from her wages were not what she had been told they were. Gordon Flint's response to this was not to adjust the contract. His response was to make her understand that the arrangement was not as straightforward as it looked, and that the visa, while genuine in its paperwork, had certain structural vulnerabilities that she had not been made aware of, and that her ability to remain in this country legally was more dependent on his continued goodwill than she had realized. She had kept working. She had not said anything. She had been trying, quietly and on her own, to find a way out of the situation that did not involve losing everything she had built for herself and her daughter. And then the situation had accelerated. Gordon had begun to want more than a financial arrangement. He had made this clear in the way that certain men make things clear, not directly, which would have been actionable, but through implication and pressure, and the particular strategy of making someone feel that the walls are closing in, until the only door that appears to be open is the one he is standing in front of. The night she left, it had stopped being implication. She did not say this in those words. She said it in a way that was compressed and careful, with the controlled language of someone who has told a version of this story before, and knows how to tell the relevant parts without giving everything away to a stranger. Nora understood the compression. She knew what lived underneath it. Lena had left that night. She had had 20 minutes of clarity and courage, and the animal certainty that she needed to move immediately, and she had moved. She had packed Emmy's bag and brought her to the estate, because the estate was the safest place she knew. She trusted Mrs. Crane. She trusted the building. She had thought she could leave Emmy in the service corridor for an hour and then come back. She had not come back in an hour. She had come back 3 days later, terrified and without a plan, and found the corridor empty, and had stood in it for a long time not knowing what to do. She had not been able to go inside. She was afraid that Gordon had people watching the estate. She was afraid that if she was seen, whatever had allowed Emmy to disappear quietly would stop being quiet. She had made contact with the forum, anonymously. She had found Francis. She had been here for 5 weeks, which were the 5 weeks in which the first phone number had started ringing instead of going to voicemail, because Francis had helped her get a new prepaid SIM while the old phone stayed off. "I didn't know who to call," Lena said. "I didn't know if calling Mrs. Crane would make things worse. Gordon has connections in the city. I don't know how wide they go. I was afraid." "You should have told someone," Nora said. "I know," Lena said. "I know." She looked at her hands. "I thought if I fixed it myself, it would stay contained. It wouldn't touch Emmy." Nora was quiet for a moment. She understood this logic completely. She had been living inside a version of it for 3 months. Oliver had been on his phone in the corner of the room, with his back turned, for most of this conversation. He turned around now. "We have enough," he said to Nora. To Lena he said, "My name is Oliver Pritchard. I work for Dominic Hale. In the next few hours I'm going to need your full cooperation with some paperwork and some conversations. In exchange, the situation you've described is going to be handled in a way that Gordon Flint will not enjoy. Do you understand?" Lena looked at him, then at Nora. Nora nodded. Lena looked back at Oliver. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I understand." "Good." He went back to his phone. Lena looked at Nora. "She really made 2 cranes today?" she said. "She's been making them since the 2nd week," Nora said. "I taught her the basic fold. She has adapted it significantly. They don't entirely resemble cranes anymore, but she is very confident about them." Lena looked at the window. "I want to go back," she said. "Can I go back with you?" "That's the plan," Nora said. "Now?" "Oliver needs another hour, probably." "Then yes." Lena nodded. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the courtyard through the window. Narrow, plain, a single plant in a pot that had been doing its best against limited light. "She'll know me?" she said, quietly. The real question underneath it. Nora understood. 3 months was not a small stretch of time in a 4-year-old's life. 3 months at that age was a significant fraction of total experience. Things changed in a child in 3 months, and the fear, the real raw fear underneath the practical question, was whether the change had been enough that recognition would take a moment longer than a mother could bear. "She asks for you every morning," Nora said. "She has not stopped asking. She knows you're coming. She has been absolutely certain of this the entire time." Lena did not say anything. She looked at the plant in the courtyard. A tear went down her face, very quietly, and she did not wipe it away for a long time. Oliver's hour became 90 minutes. Nora did not mind. She sat with Lena in the small room off the corridor and they talked, which was not something they had ever really done before. At the estate, before all of this, they had been colleagues at a distance, in the same building, aware of each other, friendly in the way of people who share an employer and an understanding of what that employer requires, but not close. There had not been time to be close. The work filled the days. Now the room was quiet, and the time was there, and something about the specific situation they were both inside, the strange intimacy of having shared, at a distance and without either of them knowing it fully, the responsibility for a small life, made ordinary conversation feel like the right thing to do. Lena asked about Emmy's sleeping, whether she had been having the dreams she always had when she was small, the ones that made her call out in the night without waking. Nora said yes, at first. The first 2 weeks had been difficult nights. She had learned quickly to simply be present when it happened. A hand on Emmy's back, a quiet voice, nothing more dramatic than that, until it passed. By the 3rd week it had mostly stopped. Lena nodded. She used to have them when things changed, she said. New places, or when she sensed something was wrong even when I told her it wasn't. Children know more than you think. She knew you were coming back, Nora said. Did she really not ask me directly? I mean, did she really not ask if I was gone? If I had left her? Nora thought about this carefully, because the honest answer mattered. Once, she said. In the 3rd week, she asked me why you weren't coming to get her at night. I said you were working on something important, and that you would come when it was done. She thought about that for a while, and then she asked if she could have the rest of my crackers. Lena made a sound, a laugh that was also something else. She takes after me, she said. She does. Nora said. Oliver knocked and came in at the 90-minute mark. He had made several calls and sent a number of emails and had, in the way of someone who operates at the intersection of significant resources and specific knowledge, begun to set things in motion. He explained to Lena, in precise and somewhat rapid language, that the visa situation was more manageable than she had been led to believe, and that Gordon Flint's leverage over it was considerably less than he had suggested, because certain elements of the arrangement were irregular, in ways that were more damaging to him than to her. He explained that there were 2 organizations he had put in contact with Francis, who would manage the formal processes from this end. He explained that Dominic Hale had, in the past hour and a half, made 3 phone calls himself, and that Gordon Flint was having an unexpectedly complicated afternoon. Lena listened to all of this and said, "He's not going to come to the estate?" "No," Oliver said. "His attention is going to be occupied elsewhere for the foreseeable future." The foreseeable future was a phrase that Oliver used in a way that implied a specific and significant stretch of time, and Nora did not ask him to define it more precisely, and Lena did not either. They left the building at 2:15 in the afternoon. The black car was still waiting. The driver, a man named Paul who had apparently been sitting there for 90 minutes without complaint, because this was what Paul did, got out and held the door, and Lena got in, and Nora got in after her, and Oliver got in front, and they drove back through the city. The drive back was mostly quiet. Lena sat very still and looked out the window. She was wearing the clothes she had been wearing when she came to the meeting, which were clean and practical but not the clothes she had worked in at the estate. She held her hands in her lap. She had the look of a person who is moving towards something enormous and is trying to keep themselves steady in advance of it. Nora understood this too. She said, "Once, about 10 minutes from the estate, she'll run to you. I want you to know that. She will see you, and she will run." Lena looked at her. "You don't know that," Lena said, not arguing, just carefully. "I know her," Nora said. Something moved across Lena's face. The recognition of what those 3 words meant, fully, not just as a statement of familiarity but as a statement of what had happened in the absence. Someone had learned her daughter in the time she could not be there to do the learning herself. Someone had stayed when she could not stay. "I don't know how to," Lena started. "You don't have to," Nora said. Lena looked at her hands. "I'm going to anyway," she said. "I just don't know how to yet." The estate gate opened as the car turned onto the driveway. The gate moved before the car stopped, in the way it always moved. Lena watched it happen and something in her posture changed. The recognition of a familiar place. The way the body knows a building it has been in before. The small involuntary adjustment of homecoming. The car stopped at the front. They got out. The front door was open. Mrs. Crane was standing in the entrance hall, visible through the door from the driveway. She had heard the car. She had, in the way she always managed things, arranged herself in the correct position before anything happened. She looked at Lena. Lena looked at her. Mrs. Crane said nothing for a moment. Then she stepped aside from the entrance hall and said, in her steady and unremarkable voice, "Emmy is in the main sitting room." Lena walked past her and into the house. The main sitting room was at the end of the entrance hall, to the left. The door was standing open. From outside the house, Nora could hear, faintly, the sound of Emmy's voice, describing something to someone. The rising and falling narrative tone of a young child explaining a story to an adult, detailed and enthusiastic and somewhat difficult to follow. Then there was a different sound. It was not a loud sound. It was the sound of a small person who has seen someone they have been waiting for, and who does not have the adult habit of managing that response before acting on it. A sharp intake of breath, and then a word, one word, said with the specific force of something that has been held back for a long time, and is now released all at once. The word was, "Mum." And then the sound of running feet on the wooden floor, and then a different kind of sound that was not the running feet but the moment after them, the impact of a small body finding its target without any hesitation whatsoever. Nora stood in the entrance hall. She did not go into the sitting room. She stood at the hall table with her hand resting on it, and she looked at the doorway and she listened. From inside the room came the sound of a reunion that did not need witnesses. She could hear Lena's voice, breaking at the edges in the way voices break when the thing you have been afraid of not happening is finally happening. She could hear Emmy talking continuously, rapidly, covering the 3 months in real time the way children do, pulling everything out of storage at once. The cranes and the toast and the book about the bear and the study and the window and Nora. Yes, Nora specifically. Nora's name appearing in the torrent of information, with the same frequency and certainty as the names of things that are fundamental. Mrs. Crane appeared at her elbow. She stood beside Nora for a moment without speaking. Then she said, very quietly, "How did you manage it, all 3 months?" Nora thought about this question. It was a real question, asked with the genuine curiosity of someone who understood what it took to manage things and who was, in her quiet way, offering recognition. "One day at a time," Nora said. "One problem at a time." Mrs. Crane was quiet for a moment. "She showed me the cranes this morning," she said, "while you were out. She showed me the proper way to fold them, apparently. I made 4 attempts. She was very patient with me." Nora looked at her. Something that might have been a smile moved across Mrs. Crane's face, very briefly. It was the most warmth Nora had seen in that face in 8 months of working beside it every day. "She's a very good teacher," Nora said. "She is," Mrs. Crane agreed. From the sitting room, Emmy's voice could be heard explaining the crane folding process to Lena in some detail. Lena's responses came at intervals, unsteady, and Emmy did not seem to notice the unsteadiness, which was perhaps the kindest possible thing. The child simply continuing her story, her certainty, her forward motion, pulling her mother along by the sheer force of having so much to tell her. Dominic was not in the entrance hall. Nora had half expected him to be there when the car arrived, but he was not. She did not know where he was. She had the sense that he had made a decision, somewhere in the 90 minutes she had been in the city, about where the appropriate place was to be for this particular moment, and that the appropriate place was not the entrance hall. She would understand this more clearly later. For now, she stood at the hall table and listened to the sitting room, and she let herself feel, for the first time in a long time, the particular weight of something that has been held for a long time being put down. It was heavier than she had expected. She had been carrying it so steadily, for so long, that she had stopped noticing it as a separate thing. It had become part of her posture, part of how she moved through the days. And now that it was releasing, not fully, not yet, because there were still things to settle, things to manage, the practical continuation of everything. It was releasing in a way that she felt in her hands and her arms, which were, she realized now, quite tired. She had been quite tired for a long time. She had not let herself know this until just now. She stood at the table and breathed, and Mrs. Crane stood beside her without saying anything, which was the most appropriate thing Mrs. Crane could have done and which was, Nora thought, very like her. Outside, through the front door, the fountain ran. The hedges stood in their correct places. The gate, having done its work, had swung quietly closed again. The day continued. The afternoon settled into an unexpected calm. Lena stayed in the sitting room with Emmy for a long time. The other staff moved around the house with the particular quiet awareness of people who know that something significant has happened in the building and who are giving it room. Clara, passing through the entrance hall with a stack of things she needed to deliver upstairs, caught Nora's eye and raised her eyebrows in a small, quick expression that communicated both the question and the answer simultaneously. Nora gave her a slight nod. Clara nodded back and moved on. Patrick appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, looked at Nora, looked at the sitting room door, and said nothing, because he had built his whole life on saying nothing and he had made it into a kind of fluency. Helen Marsh, who already knew far more than anyone had told her because this was what happened when you had spent 30 years watching the inside of other people's lives, sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the expression of someone who is going to wait patiently for the full story and is comfortable waiting as long as it takes. Oliver left at 3:30. He shook Nora's hand at the door, which surprised her slightly, and he said, "Good work, both today and the 3 months before it." Then he got into the car with Paul and drove back toward the city. Mrs. Crane had tea delivered to the sitting room, a full tray with biscuits and another small plate of triangular toast for Emmy, because Emmy had apparently informed Mrs. Crane at some point during the morning that triangular toast was superior to square toast in every respect, and Mrs. Crane had filed this information and was now acting on it. At around 4 in the afternoon, the sitting room door opened and Emmy appeared in the entrance hall. She was holding Lena's hand, which she had apparently not released since the reunion, and she was leading her in the specific purposeful way she led people when she had something to show them. "I need to show her my cranes," she said to Nora as she passed, "the ones in the study." "The study is upstairs," Nora said, "second door on the left." "I know where it is," Emmy said, with the mild impatience of someone who has been living in this house for 3 months and would like that acknowledged. Nora looked at Lena, who was being led by her daughter toward the stairs with an expression that was somewhere beyond happiness, past the point where happiness is a specific thing, and into the territory where it is simply everything. "The cranes are very good," Nora called after them. Emmy did not look back. She was already on the stairs. Lena looked back, over her shoulder as she went. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Nora stood in the entrance hall and listened to the two of them climb the stairs, Emmy's voice steady and certain, Lena's answers coming at intervals, and the specific sound of a child who has been waiting to show her mother everything, and is now doing so, room by room, detail by detail, leaving nothing out. The house was both quieter and fuller than it had been this morning. It was, Nora thought, a very particular kind of quiet. She went to the kitchen. She sat down at the table across from Helen. Helen poured her a cup of tea and pushed it across without being asked. "Well," Helen said. "Yes," Nora said. They drank their tea. Helen said, eventually, 3 months. "Yes." "On your own?" "Yes." Helen looked at her cup. Then she looked at Nora. "I've been in this business 30 years, she said. "I've seen things in private houses that would make your hair stand up, and I've seen things that would make you believe in people again. What you did." She stopped, picked up her cup, set it down. "What you did was one of the second kind." Nora looked at the table. "It wasn't complicated," she said. "She needed someone to stay. I stayed." Helen looked at her for a long moment. "That," she said, "is exactly what makes it one of the second kind." Nora drank her tea. At 5 o'clock, Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Nora. He looked at Helen. Helen stood up with the quiet fluency of someone who has been in private households for 30 years and knows when a room needs to have fewer people in it, took her cup to the sink, and left. Dominic sat down in the chair she had been sitting in. He had changed out of his travel clothes, or had changed at some point during the day, she was not sure when, but he was no longer in the jacket and shirt of a man who had recently been in international meetings. He looked more ordinary in this version, not less authoritative, just less armored. He put a small document on the table between them. "Oliver prepared this afternoon," he said. "It's an amendment to your employment contract. You don't need to sign it today. You should read it. I'd like you to take your time with it." Nora looked at the document. She did not pick it up yet. "What does it say?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "It makes your position here permanent," he said. "It adjusts your salary to reflect what you should have been paid from the beginning, which is higher than what the agency quoted. It includes a benefit provision for your brother's medical program through the estate's employee support fund." Nora looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time without picking it up. "I didn't do what I did because I needed something from you," she said. "I know," he said. "I did it because she needed someone and I was there, and it was the right thing." "I know," he said again. She looked at him. "This isn't a payment," he said. "You were already underpaid before any of this. The amendment corrects that. The benefit provision exists because your brother's situation is significant, and you have been managing it while also managing everything else, and there is no reason why you should have to manage it alone when there are resources available." She was quiet. "Also," he said, "I looked at your references this afternoon. The placement agency gave me the summary version. I read the full versions. The people who recommended you described someone who was reliable and skilled and very good at managing difficult circumstances quietly and without making them larger than they needed to be." He paused. "They were not wrong." Nora looked at the table. "Lena," she said, "what happens to her?" "Oliver is working on the visa situation. The formal complications are manageable, more manageable than she was led to believe, which was deliberate on Flint's part, because leverage only works if you believe in it. She'll have time to decide where she wants to be and what she wants to do. She has options that she didn't know she had this morning." Nora nodded. "And Flint?" Dominic looked at the table. "Gordon Flint," he said, "is having a conversation this evening with several people who have been waiting to have it for some time. My involvement is that I made a few calls. The rest of it is not my operation, but I have reason to believe he will be occupied with it for quite a while." She thought about this. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. She picked up the document. She read it, all of it. She was someone who read things, fully, before deciding what to do about them. Dominic sat across from her and did not speak while she read, which was exactly the right thing to do and which she noticed. When she finished, she set it down. "I'll sign it," she said. "Not today. I'd like to sleep on it." "Of course," he said. He stood up. He picked up his own cup, which he had apparently brought in with him and which she only now noticed, and he carried it to the sink. He stood at the sink for a moment with his back to her. "You held my house together," he said, quietly. "To the sink or to the window above it. Every week, on schedule. And at the same time you were doing something else entirely, that nobody asked you to do, and you did it without complaint and without recognition, and without asking for either." He did not turn around. "That is not a small thing," he said. Nora did not say anything. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear Emmy's voice, showing her mother the cranes, explaining the method, confident, clear, entirely certain that her audience was interested. She was not wrong about that. Dominic left the kitchen. Nora sat at the table for a moment, alone. Then she reached for the document and folded it carefully and put it in the pocket of her uniform. She would read it again tonight. She would sleep on it. She would make a decision in the morning with a clear head and a full night behind her, which was the only way she made important decisions. She stood up. She went upstairs. She found Emmy and Lena in the study, sitting on the floor beside the armchair, surrounded by cranes. Lena was making one, badly, with Emmy's patient and thorough guidance. The jacket was still on the armrest. The lamp was on. The light through the window was late afternoon gold, the kind that makes any room look warmer than it is. Emmy looked up when Nora came in. "She's not very good at the fold," she said, by way of update. "She's learning," Nora said. "She needs to try it again," Emmy said. Lena looked up from her attempt. Her eyes were red at the edges still, but her expression was different from what it had been in the small room at Francis's organization. It was the expression of a person who has come back from somewhere they were not sure they would return from. "Sit down," Emmy said to Nora. "You can practice too." Nora sat down on the floor of the study. She crossed her legs. She accepted a square of paper from Emmy, who distributed them with the efficiency of a small person who has been the most capable individual in the room for long enough that it has become normal. Outside the window, the light was going soft. The fountain below ran in its steady circle. The hedges stood where they always stood. The three of them sat on the floor of Dominic Hale's private study and made paper cranes, and Emmy corrected both of them, and the evening came on quietly, which was how the best evenings come. The next morning arrived differently. Nora noticed it as soon as she woke, something in the quality of the light through the narrow window of her room, or something in the particular absence of the tension she had been waking with every morning for 3 months. The low-level, permanent alertness of someone who has a secret, the immediate, on-waking check. Is the house quiet? Did anything happen in the night? Is she all right? She lay still for a moment and listened. Quiet, real quiet, not the held breath kind. She got up. She went down the corridor to the room that Mrs. Crane had arranged for Lena and Emmy the previous evening, a proper guest room, with a real bed and a mattress that did not require a folded towel for additional comfort, with a window that looked onto the side garden. She had expected Emmy to resist the change. Emmy had not resisted. She had walked into the room, looked at the bed, looked at the window, turned around, and said, "Is Mum going to sleep here?" And when Nora had said yes, Emmy had climbed onto the bed and lain down on one side of it, on top of the covers, and said, "She goes here," patting the other side, "and I go here." Nora had understood. She had kissed Emmy goodnight, which was a thing she had started doing in the second week, and which had become as fixed a part of their evening as the shoe-lining game. And she had left the door open 3 inches, so that if Emmy woke in the night and reached out, and the person next to her was real and warm and present, the adjustment of this reality would not be an adjustment in a closed room. She had checked at midnight. Lena was in the bed. Emmy was against her, a small shape fitted into the larger one, in the way that children return to their original configuration when given the chance. Nora had gone back to her room and slept for the first time in a long time without waking at the sounds the house made. Now she stood outside their door in the early morning and listened. She could hear Emmy talking, the same continuous reporting voice as always, laying out the morning's observations in the order they had arrived. She could hear Lena responding, steadier now, the voice of someone who has slept. She did not knock. She went to the kitchen instead. Clara was already there, making coffee, and she turned when Nora came in with an expression that had a specific character to it, the expression of someone who has a great deal to say, and has been managing the desire to say it since yesterday afternoon. "Morning," Nora said. "Good morning," Clara said, which she said the way she said everything, with the particular warmth that Clara apparently generated automatically, the way a lamp generates light when it's on. "Coffee? Please." Clara poured 2 cups and brought them to the table. She sat down across from Nora and looked at her with the frank, open directness that was Clara's way of doing most things. "So," she said. "So," Nora said. 3 months, Clara said. "Yes." Clara looked at her coffee, then at Nora. "I have about 40 questions," she said. "But I'm going to start with, are you all right? And I want the real answer, not the one you give when someone's looking at you." Nora thought about this. "I'm tired," she said. I've been tired for a while. I didn't know how tired until it was over. Clara nodded. This was the real answer. You should have told me, she said. Not accusatory, just direct. I know, Nora said. I would have helped. I know. I wouldn't have told anyone. I know that too. Nora looked at her coffee. I wasn't sure, for a long time, whether telling anyone made Emmy safer or less safe. And once I'd made the decision to manage it on my own, changing that decision felt like, I don't know, like the act of telling someone would make everything that had held together come apart. Clara thought about this. That's very logical, she said, and also very exhausting. Yes, Nora said, both. Clara drank her coffee. She's lovely, by the way, she said. Emmy, she told me yesterday while you were out that my hair is the right color for a crayon. She meant this as a compliment, I think. She definitely meant it as a compliment, Nora said. That's what I decided. Clara said. Crayon red. I've had worse descriptions. Sakan. The kitchen filled slowly over the next half hour. Patrick came in for coffee, said good morning to both of them, and poured his cup with the efficiency of a man who has calculated the minimum amount of morning he needs to consume before being functional. Gerald came through for his second cup. He started at 5:30 in the grounds, which meant his second cup was at 7, which meant he had already been working for 90 minutes by the time anyone else arrived. He nodded at Nora with the particular nod of someone who has been aware of things that were not his to ask about and has chosen, correctly, not to ask. Helen came in at 7:15 and sat down and looked at Nora across the table and said, How's the arm? Nora looked at her. The one you've been holding everything up with, Helen said. For 3 months. Nora thought this was probably the most accurate thing anyone had said to her in several days. Sore, she said. Yes, Helen said. It would be. At 7:30, Emmy appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had her rabbit under her arm and she was dressed, which meant Lena had been awake and functional, which was a good sign. She looked around the kitchen with the methodical survey of someone taking inventory. She saw Nora. She saw Clara. She saw the other people at the table. Then she went directly to the stool at the kitchen island that had, at some point in the past 3 months, become her stool without anyone formally assigning it. It had simply been where she sat, and she had sat on it consistently enough that it had become her stool in the way that things become ours through repeated claim, and she climbed onto it and sat down. Toast, she said. Please. Clara stood up. Triangular? She said. Yes, please, Emmy said. Clara went to the bread. Lena appeared in the doorway a moment later. She was in a borrowed set of clothes. Mrs. Crane had organized this the previous evening with the quiet efficiency that Mrs. Crane applied to all practical problems, and her hair was down. She looked at the kitchen, at the people in it, at Emmy on the stool with her rabbit. She looked at Nora. Nora pulled out the chair beside her. Lena came and sat down. They did not say anything for a moment. They did not need to. The kitchen was warm and full of coffee, and the sound of Clara's activity at the counter, and Emmy was providing a running commentary on the appearance of the toast as it progressed through its stages of becoming, and Patrick was looking at his phone with the focused concentration of a man who has found something mildly interesting in it, and Gerald was refilling his cup and Helen was doing the crossword, which she did every morning, with a pen, which meant that she either did it in pencil first and then went over it, or she was genuinely confident enough to go directly in ink, and Nora had never asked which. It was a morning. It was just a morning. This seemed to Nora like a remarkable thing. Dominic appeared at 8 o'clock. He came through the kitchen on his way to the main floor office, which was his usual route when he was home and starting his working day, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway the way he had stopped in the study doorway the previous morning, though the room was now considerably fuller. He looked at Emmy. Emmy looked at him. Good morning, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Good morning, he said. There's toast, she said. Triangular. I can see that, he said. Do you want some? She said. The kitchen was very quiet for a fraction of a second. Clara, at the counter, had her back turned, and Nora could see from the set of Clara's shoulders that she was actively suppressing something. Thank you, Dominic said. I'm all right. There's plenty, Emmy said. I appreciate that, he said. He looked at Nora. She met his eyes. Something passed between them in the way things pass between two people who have had an unexpected experience together and are now navigating the ordinary morning on the other side of it. He moved on. She heard his office door close. Clara turned around with a fully composed expression that had clearly taken some effort. Triangular, Emmy repeated, looking at her toast. It's better. I know, Clara said. I agree with you completely. The morning continued. At 9 o'clock, Oliver called. Nora took the call in the entrance hall, with the door to the kitchen closed so the conversation was private. Oliver spoke quickly, and with the precision of someone delivering a briefing. Gordon Flint had had a very full evening. Several conversations had taken place. 2 of them were with regulatory bodies that had been interested in his operation for some time but had not, until yesterday, had the particular combination of documentation and testimony that would make them move. Oliver did not say where the documentation had come from. He said that it had arrived in the right places and that people were now moving. Flint's operation, the visa arrangement, the financial structure, the specific leverage he held over people like Lena, was in the process of being examined in ways that would occupy him entirely for the foreseeable future. Lena's visa situation, Oliver continued, was being addressed through a separate channel. The complications were real but manageable, and the managing was underway. She would need to attend 2 appointments in the city over the next week. Oliver had arranged the transport and the representation. There were no guarantees on timelines, but the situation was moving in the right direction, and the people handling it were good at what they did. What do I tell her? Nora said. Tell her it's in hand, Oliver said. Because it is. Nora thought about how much weight those 3 words needed to carry. She'll ask for specifics, she said. Then tell her the specifics I've given you. They're real. They're enough for now. She went back to the kitchen. Lena looked up when she came in. She could read Nora's face, at this point, with the ease of someone who has been watching another person for cues in an uncertain situation and has developed fluency in the reading. Well, she said. It's in hand, Nora said. Lena looked at her. Really? Really. Lena was quiet for a moment. Emmy was eating her toast. She had reached the final triangle and was eating it slowly, in the way of someone who is aware they are reaching the end of something good and is managing the pacing accordingly. I have appointments this week, Nora said. You have appointments this week. Oliver has arranged transport. We go. We do what needs doing, and then it gets better. She said this last part with the certainty that you use when you are not completely certain, but you are certain enough. The certainty that says, I will stand behind this statement. I will do what it takes to make it true. Lena looked at her across the kitchen table. You talk like someone who has managed impossible things before, she said. Nora thought about the service corridor, the buzzing light, the 3 months, the document in her pocket that she had read again last night and was going to sign today. I've managed a few things, she said. At 10 o'clock, Nora knocked on the door of the main floor office. Come in, said Dominic. She came in. She had the document in her hand. She had read it twice more, once before bed, once this morning at the kitchen table before the others came in, and she had thought about it, and she had decided. She set it on the desk in front of him. She had signed at the bottom. He looked at it. He looked at her. You didn't sleep on it, he said. I did, she said. I sleep quickly. He picked up a pen and countersigned it, efficiently, without ceremony. He set the pen down. Good, he said. She picked the document up. She turned to leave. Nora, he said. She turned back. He was looking at the document in her hand, or at the space just near it. He had the expression of a man who has something to say and is choosing between several versions of it. The study, he said, on the upper floor. She waited. You'll notice, when you go up there today, that the armchair has been moved, he said. I moved it back to its original position this morning. She looked at him. I thought it might be useful to know, he said, in case you were wondering what to do with it. She understood what this meant. The armchair was back in its position. The room was hers to return to on Thursdays, as it always had been. The arrangement was not a crisis. The arrangement was something that had happened and was now the arrangement, cleaned and integrated and managed, the way things in this house were managed, without drama, in the correct positions. Thank you, she said. It's your room to manage, he said. It always has been. She left. In the corridor outside the office, she stood for a moment. Then she went upstairs. The study was in its usual Thursday state. The desk, the bookshelves on 2 walls, the worn edges of the old desk, the leather chair near the fireplace that was cleaned but never lit, the lamp with the characteristic flicker. The armchair was back in its place by the window. She went to it and stood beside it for a moment, looking at it. The jacket was gone. Mrs. Crane or someone had collected it and returned it to Nora's room. The armrest had the slight impression that comes from any piece of furniture that has been used in a particular way for a period of time. A small compression in the leather, something that would fade completely within a week. She ran her hand across it. Then she went to the cleaning supplies she had left 3 months ago, in the corner of the room where she always left them, and she picked up her cloth. She started with the upper shelves. She moved through the room in her usual sequence, the one she had established in her first month and had not deviated from since, because it was the correct sequence for this room, the one that moved logically from high to low, from surfaces to floor, from the things that needed the least attention to the things that needed the most. She cleaned the desk, moving carefully around the papers that were arranged in the way they always were, in his personal logic that she had long since accepted without needing to fully understand. She adjusted the lamp angle, which had drifted slightly. She noted that the third shelf still leaned, very slightly, to the right. She made a note to ask Patrick about the lean. It could be corrected. It would take 20 minutes and the right tool and someone who knew what they were doing. She had been meaning to mention it for months. Now there was time. She was at the window, cleaning the glass, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She knew them before the door opened. Emmy's feet, uneven in the way of small children who have not yet figured out why stairs go up on one side and down on the other, and Lena's steps behind them, steadier. The door opened. Emmy came in, rabbit under one arm, and went directly to the armchair and put her hand on it. "This is where I was," she told her mother. Lena came to the doorway and stood in it, looking at the room. She looked at the desk and the shelves and the worn leather of the chair near the fireplace and the window where Nora was standing with a cloth. "It's a good room," Lena said. "It's the best room," Emmy said, with complete certainty. Nora wrung out the cloth. "I'm done with the window," she said. "Give me 20 more minutes and you can have the room." "Can we stay while you finish?" Emmy asked. Nora looked at her. She looked at Lena. "Yes," she said. "You can stay while I finish." Emmy climbed onto the armchair. She sat with her legs hanging off the front and the rabbit in her lap and looked out the window at the grounds below. The fountain, the hedges, the long driveway with the gate at the end. Lena sat in the leather chair by the fireplace. Nora cleaned. The room was quiet, in the comfortable way of rooms where people are doing different things in the same space, and there is no pressure for any of them to be doing the same thing. The dust cloth moved along the shelves. Emmy commented, at intervals, on things she could see out the window. Lena said, and yes, and look at that, at the correct moments. Outside, Gerald was raking the gravel. He moved across the driveway in his steady rhythm. 11 years of the same motion, the same path, the same rake. Nora reached the lower shelves. She moved along them, noting the books in their personal order. The ones read earliest near the far left, the most recent near the door. She had never disrupted this order. She had simply learned it and worked around it. She was near the door when she found the new one. It was on the end of the lowest shelf, and it was clearly new. The spine not cracked yet, the color of it brighter than its neighbors. She had not seen it before, which meant it had been placed here recently. This morning, perhaps. She did not pick it up. She dusted around it and noted the title. It was a book on origami, simple fold-by-fold instructions, the cover showing a series of paper animals in a row, the kind of book you would give to someone who was learning. She stood at the lowest shelf and looked at it. Then she kept cleaning. 20 minutes later, she gathered her supplies. "Done," she said. Emmy looked up from the window. "All clean?" she said. "All clean," Nora said. Emmy looked satisfied with this. She slid down from the armchair and went to the bookshelf. She looked at the spines for a moment. Then she saw the origami book. She pulled it out. She looked at the cover. She looked at Nora. Then she looked at Lena. "Mum," she said, with the authority of someone who has identified the next important thing. "Come and look." Lena came from the chair by the fireplace. She crouched down beside Emmy and looked at the book. Emmy opened it to the first page. "We can learn these," she said, "all of them." She said this with the specific confidence of someone who has already decided that the answer is yes, and who is merely informing the adults in the room of the plan. Lena looked at the book. She looked at the crane that Emmy still had in her pocket, corners soft from being carried. She looked at Nora. Nora picked up her cleaning supplies. She went to the door. She paused for a moment in the doorway. The light was coming through the study window the way she liked it best, morning light, clean and plain, falling across the shelves and the desk and the two people sitting on the floor with a new book between them. "I'll leave you to it," she said. She went out into the corridor and pulled the door softly behind her. She stood in the corridor for a moment, in the quiet house, on an ordinary Thursday morning. Then she went to find Patrick about the shelf. The week that followed was not quiet exactly. It was busy in a way that had a different quality from the busy that had come before it. the controlled busy of secret keeping, replaced by the open busy of things actually being done. Lena had 2 appointments in the city. Oliver had arranged a solicitor, a woman named Caroline Briggs who worked with immigration cases and who had, according to Oliver, the specific kind of tenacity that such cases required. She was small and direct and spoke with the speed of someone who has no patience for preamble. And Lena came back from the first appointment looking stunned in the way that people look when something that has been presented to them as impossible turns out, on inspection by the right person, to be considerably less so. She said the arrangement was flawed from the start, Lena told Nora on the way back. She said Gordon presented things as fixed when they weren't. She said he's built an entire operation on making people believe they have no options when actually the options exist. She said, she stopped, looked out the window of the car. She said this happens more often than anyone admits. She said she's dealt with 20 cases like mine in the last 2 years. And, Nora said. And it's still complicated, Lena said. But she said complicated is not the same as hopeless. She said those 2 things get confused on purpose. Nora thought about this. That's true, she said. Complicated and hopeless are very different things. Yes, Lena said. I'm only just understanding how different. The second appointment produced a document that Lena needed to review and sign, and that Caroline would then file, and that would initiate a formal process that would take time, but that was now in motion. Caroline had been very clear about the timeline. This was not a quick fix, she said, but it was a real path, and it moved forward, and there was no reason, given the specific circumstances, why it should not succeed. Lena had cried in the solicitor's office. She had apologized for this. Caroline had said, "Don't apologize, I see it all the time. It's the right response to being told things are going to be all right when you've been told for months that they won't be." While Lena had her appointments, Nora kept Emmy. This was natural. It was what they did. It had the quality of things that have been practiced enough to become automatic. The morning routine, the meals, the particular ways that Emmy needed the day to be structured to feel secure in it. Lena watched, when she was there, with a specific attention. Not jealously. Something more generous than that. She was watching what Nora had learned in 3 months. The specific knowledge of her daughter that had been earned in the absence, and she was receiving it as information, adding it to what she already knew, rebuilding the picture. She asked questions when they came to her, directly and without self-consciousness. Does she still wake in the night? Less, rarely now. She did in the first 2 weeks. What did you do? I sat beside her. I didn't pick her up, just sat next to her until it stopped. That's what I used to do, Lena said. I know, Nora said. She told me, eventually. She said that's what you did when the dark felt too big. Lena was quiet for a moment, then, she said that? Word for word, Nora said. When the dark feels too big. Lena looked at the ceiling. She listens more than she lets on, she said. She absolutely does, Nora said. There were also, in that week, the conversations with Mrs. Crane. These had not been Nora's idea. Mrs. Crane had initiated them. She had come to Nora's room on the second evening and knocked and asked, in the way she asked most things, directly and without preamble, whether Nora had a few minutes. Nora had said yes. Mrs. Crane had sat down in the one chair and Nora had sat on the bed, and Mrs. Crane had talked for a while in a way that Nora had never heard her talk before, not with the measured efficiency of a professional communication, but with something more personal. She said she felt responsible. Nora had started to say that she shouldn't, but Mrs. Crane had raised one hand, briefly, in a gesture that meant let me finish. She said she felt responsible because she managed this household, and in this household, a 4-year-old child had spent 3 months in the circumstances she had spent them in, and Mrs. Crane had not known. She was not saying this to create drama about it, she said. She was saying it because she had thought about it carefully, and it seemed important to say. An employee under her authority had carried a significant burden alone, in part because that employee had not been confident that the systems in place would handle it correctly. This was information. She was going to do something with it. Nora said, "You couldn't have known. I didn't tell anyone." "You didn't tell anyone because you weren't sure it would be handled correctly." Mrs. Crane said, "I understand that. I'm asking you to help me understand what I should do differently, so that the next time someone in this house is carrying something they shouldn't be carrying alone, they have somewhere to bring it." Nora looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "That's a real question." "Yes," Mrs. Crane said. "I'm asking it." They talked for an hour. Nora said things she had not planned to say, about the specific calculation she had made in the service corridor, whether involving the household meant involving official systems, and whether official systems were reliable, about the particular vulnerability of people in Lena's situation who are told by someone with power over them that the systems that should protect them are instead the systems that will harm them. About the way leverage works, not through direct force but through manufactured belief. Mrs. Crane listened to all of it. Then she said, "What would have made you trust the household enough to come to me?" This was, Nora thought, the right question. She thought about it honestly. "If I had known," she said, "that the first response would have been to protect Emmy, not to manage the situation, not to involve the appropriate people in the appropriate sequence, but to protect Emmy first, and then sort out the rest." Mrs. Crane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That should have been obvious." "It wasn't," Nora said. "Not to me. Not from the outside." Mrs. Crane nodded, once. The following morning, at the staff briefing, a brief, practical daily meeting that Mrs. Crane ran at 8 o'clock, standing, in the kitchen, going through the day's requirements. She said something at the end that was not on the usual agenda. She said, "If anyone in this house is dealing with something difficult, there is a way to tell me in confidence, and I will respond to the thing that matters first. The rest can wait." She said it in exactly that number of words. She moved on to the next item. She did not make it a speech. Clara caught Nora's eye across the kitchen table. Nora looked at her coffee. This was, she thought, exactly the right way to do it. Dominic, as the week progressed, was present at the estate in a way that was different from his usual presences. He was working. The summit had produced, as summits do, a significant amount of follow-up work that needed to be done regardless of the fact that the summit had not gone as planned. He was on calls for hours each day. He was in the office with the door closed and, when the door opened, moving with the particular focused efficiency of someone who is operating across multiple time zones simultaneously and has learned to be everywhere at once without appearing to be anywhere at all. But he was home. This was the specific difference. He was home in a way he had not been in the months before. Not because the work had changed. The work was the same. He was simply doing it here and not departing. Nora noticed this. She did not remark on it to anyone, not even Clara, who was clearly also noticing it, and who was managing her considerable desire to remark on it with visible effort. She noticed other things too. She noticed that on Tuesday morning, she had come upstairs to start on the study and had found the shelf corrected. Patrick had fixed the lean. She had asked Patrick when he had gotten to it, and Patrick had said that Dominic had mentioned it to him on Monday evening. Dominic had mentioned it to Patrick. He had been in the study then, and had noticed the lean, and had mentioned it to the correct person. She noticed that the origami book on the lowest shelf had been moved, not replaced, moved to the second shelf. The space it had occupied on the lowest shelf was now filled by another book, also new, also bright-spined, on the subject of architecture for children, which was a book that no child under 12 had any particular reason to own, but that was, from the description on the back, apparently designed to be read by a child with a patient adult beside them. She found this book on the second shelf on Wednesday. She did not move it. She cleaned around it. On Thursday afternoon, she was in the kitchen when Dominic came through on his way to somewhere else, and he stopped in the way he sometimes stopped now. Not long, not announced, just a pause in the moving from one place to the next. Emmy was at her stool, working on a crane from the origami book. She had progressed to the intermediate section, which meant the cranes were recognizably cranes but still had a creative independence to their angles. Dominic looked at the crane. "What's this one?" he said. Emmy looked up. She held it up. She examined it. "It's a bird," she said. "It's not a crane yet. It's on its way to being a crane." He looked at it for a moment. "Almost there," he said. "Almost," she agreed seriously, "but almost as good." He looked at her for a moment with the expression he had in the doorway of the study on that first morning, the one she could not name precisely, but that had something in it she recognized now as simply genuine. Not performed, not managed, just there. "Almost is very good," he said. He went through to the office. Clara, at the counter, turned around with her composed face. "Toast?" she said to Emmy. "Please," Emmy said, already back to her crane. Clara caught Nora's eye. Nora looked at the table. "Triangular," Emmy added. "Obviously," Clara said. The week moved through its days. Lena's appointments were done. The paperwork was filed. Caroline Briggs had sent a confirmation email that Oliver had forwarded to Nora, because Oliver was thorough, and the email confirmed what Caroline had said. The process was in motion. It would take time. It was moving in the right direction. Gordon Flint's operation, according to a brief message Oliver sent on Thursday, was under formal examination. His ability to run anything that touched the kind of arrangements he had been running was now significantly constrained, and the constraints were being made permanent by the relevant people. Oliver did not elaborate. He said that he thought this was enough for Nora to know. It was. On Thursday evening, Lena found Nora in the East Wing corridor, coming back from the laundry room. She had the specific look of someone who has been waiting for a moment and has found it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right," Nora said. "I don't know how to make right what you did for 3 months," Lena said. "I don't think it can be made right exactly, because what you did was bigger than anything I can give you back. But I want you to know that I know what it was. I know what it cost. I know what it took, every day, to keep her safe, and to keep going to work, and to not say anything, and to not fall apart." Nora held the laundry she had come to collect. "She was easy to love," she said. "That made it easier." Lena looked at her. "You stayed," she said. It was the same thing she had said in the small room at Francis's organization, but this time it had a different weight behind it, not the raw shock of learning it for the first time, the considered, deliberate weight of having thought about it for 5 days. "Yes," Nora said. "People don't always stay," Lena said. "I know," Nora said. They stood in the corridor for a moment. Then Lena said, "She says you have to finish the bear book with her, the one about the bear building the house." "We got up to the storm," Nora said. "She says the end is good." "Then I'll finish it," Nora said. Lena nodded. She went back down the corridor. Nora stood for a moment with her laundry. The bear book was on the windowsill of the guest room, where it had lived since Mrs. Crane brought it. The bear's house had fallen down in the storm. Something came after the storm, presumably. Bears, in books like these, rebuilt things. She thought she had time to find out. She went to find Emmy. The bear did rebuild. Nora discovered this at 8:30 on Thursday evening, sitting on the guest room floor with Emmy in her lap and Lena on the bed behind them, all three of them reading the final pages. The bear found better materials the second time. The house was smaller than the first one but sturdier, built with more care because the bear now understood what storms could do. At the very end, the bear sat outside the smaller, sturdier house and looked at the place where the first house had been, and then looked at the new one, and then went inside. The end. Emmy was quiet for a moment after Nora closed the book. Then she said, "Why didn't the bear make the second house as big as the first one?" "Because the bear built it alone," Nora said. "And building alone takes longer, so you build smaller." Emmy thought about this. "The bear should have asked someone for help," she said. "Yes," Nora said. "That's probably true." Emmy looked at the closed book. "I would have helped," she said, "if I was there." "I know you would have," Nora said. Lena, on the bed, said, "Come here." She reached down and Emmy climbed up, rabbit and all, and settled against her. Lena looked at Nora over the top of Emmy's head. Nora set the book on the windowsill. "Good night," she said. "Good night," Lena said. "Night," Emmy said, already on her way toward sleep. Nora turned off the lamp and pulled the door to 3 inches, the way she always had, because 3 inches was the right distance, not closed, not open, but present. She went down the corridor. She went to her own room. She sat on her bed in the dark for a while, not sleeping, just being there, in the quiet, in the house, the sounds of the building, the occasional creak that large old houses make when the temperature changes, the fountain somewhere outside, faint but present, the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen below, which was audible from her room only when everything else was quiet. She thought about the bear. She thought about asking for help. She had not asked for help. She had held everything herself for 3 months, and she had done it correctly, and everything had worked out. But she thought about what Mrs. Crane had said, and what she had said back to Mrs. Crane, and she thought about the distance between what is right and what is sustainable, and she thought that these two things are not always the same. She had been lucky. The house had been lucky. The study had been undisturbed. The Thursday schedule had held. Dominic had come home early, and the situation had resolved rather than collapsed. All of this was true, but it had been close. She lay down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought, next time, not this situation, because this situation was over, but the next time something landed in front of her that needed to be carried, she would think about whether she had to carry it alone. She would think about whether the instinct to manage it in silence was the right instinct, or just the familiar one. She would think about the bear in the smaller house and the question that a 4-year-old had asked that was probably the most correct thing said in the room that evening. The bear should have asked for help. Yes, she thought. Probably. She slept. In the morning, she woke to quiet again. The real kind. She lay still and listened to it, and she felt, for the second morning in a row, the specific absence of the 3-month wait. It was not gone entirely. She did not expect it to be. You do not carry something for 3 months and set it down cleanly. It leaves a shape, a kind of posture that the body remembers and has to unlearn. She had learned this before, with other things. But it was lighter than it had been. That was enough, for this morning. She got up. She went downstairs. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table in the early quiet, before anyone else arrived, and she drank her coffee, and she was there, in the kitchen of this house that she had, 8 months ago, come to on a Tuesday morning in early spring with a single bag and sensible shoes, and the particular stillness of someone entering a new place without announcing themselves, and she was simply, without drama, at home. Not because the house was hers. It was not hers. It belonged to someone else, in the ordinary way that houses belong to the people who own them. But she was at home in it, in the specific sense of, she knew where the coffee was, and she knew which chair was the right chair at this time of morning, and she knew what sounds the house made when it was waking up, and she knew the quality of the early light through the kitchen window, and she knew the people who would arrive in the next hour and what they needed when they came through the door. She knew the room. She had stayed long enough to know it. This was what staying meant, in the end. Not permanence, not a guarantee, not the certainty that nothing would change or go wrong. Just long enough to know the room. Long enough that the room knew you back. Long enough that when you sat in it in the early morning, the quiet felt like something belonging to you both. She drank her coffee. Gerald came in at 6:55 with his second cup energy. She poured it for him without being asked. He took it with a nod that contained, as most of Gerald's nods did, an entire paragraph. Clara came in at 7 and said good morning and reached past Nora to get her own cup from the shelf, and as she did she rested her hand briefly on Nora's shoulder. Just a moment, light, and then it was gone, and did not say anything further about it because she was Clara, and she understood exactly how much and how little to say about most things. Patrick came through. Helen came in. Mrs. Crane appeared at the doorway, assessed the room, appeared satisfied, and said the day's requirements without preamble. It was a Friday morning. The house was in order. 2 weeks after the Thursday that everything changed, Lena made a decision. She told Nora about it on a Saturday morning, in the kitchen, with Emmy at her stool working on a new crane, a more ambitious one this time, from a page in the intermediate section that required 7 specific folds in a precise order, and that Emmy had been studying for 3 days before attempting. She said she wanted to go back to work, not at the estate. She said this carefully, because she wanted Nora to understand that she was not saying she wanted to return to the kitchen here, to the same position, to the specific geometry of the life she had been living before. She said she needed to do something new, something that was entirely hers, in a way that the previous arrangement had not been, because the previous arrangement had come through someone else, and she needed, for her own sense of herself, to build the next thing herself, from the start. Where? Nora said. I don't know yet, Lena said. Caroline has some ideas. There are domestic positions in the city, some through legitimate agencies. She's given me the name of a woman who places people properly. Nora looked at her coffee. Emmy, she said. Emmy will be with me, Lena said. Whatever the position is, it has to accommodate Emmy. That's a requirement, not a preference. What if it takes time? It will take time, Lena said. I know that. I'm not in a hurry to be stupid about it. I'm in a hurry to start. Nora nodded. She understood this. The need to be moving forward under your own power, on your own terms, rather than in a situation that had been arranged by someone else. She had had this feeling herself, more than once. It was the feeling that makes people leave things that are working in favor of things that are theirs. When? She said. A few more weeks, probably, Lena said, while Caroline finalizes the paperwork. I want to be legal before I move anywhere. She said this the way she said most things now, directly, without embarrassment. The particular transformation that happens to a person when the thing they have been afraid of turns out to be survivable. They stop managing what they say, and start simply saying it. And I want to find the right position, not just the first one. All right, Nora said. I want Emmy to stay in contact with you, Lena said. If you want that. Nora looked at her. Of course I want that, she said. Lena nodded. She looked at her daughter, who was on the 7th fold of her crane and was holding her breath in the specific way of someone who has reached the difficult part and is giving it everything. She's going to miss this house, Lena said. She's going to miss the toast, Nora said. Yes, Lena said, that specifically. Something moved between them that was partly a laugh and partly something else. Emmy made the 7th fold. She held the crane up. It was recognizably a crane, more recognizably than any she had made before. The angles were not entirely correct, but the essential shape was there, and the wings spread in the right direction. "Done," she said. She held it out to Lena. Lena took it. She looked at it for a moment. "It's perfect," she said. Emmy looked at it critically. "The left wing is higher than the right wing," she said. "That means it's flying in a circle," Lena said. Emmy considered this. "That's okay," she decided. "Circles are fine." Nora's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She excused herself and went to the corridor. "Hello? Ms. Voss?" A woman's voice, professional, slightly formal. "Yes. My name is Patricia Sutton. I'm calling on behalf of a family in the city who are looking for a senior domestic manager. Your name was put forward by a contact of mine. I understand you have some experience in high-end household management?" Nora stood in the corridor. She thought about the document she had signed, the permanent position, the salary that had been corrected. "I'm currently employed," she said. "I understand," Patricia said. "I'm sorry to reach out directly. Your name came up from a source I trust, and we're looking for someone specific. Would you be open to a conversation, at least? No obligation." Nora was quiet for a moment. "How did you get my name?" she said. Patricia said a name. It was Oliver Pritchard. Nora leaned against the corridor wall. "When did Mr. Pritchard give you my name?" she said. "Earlier this week," Patricia said. "He called me specifically. He said, and this is an unusual thing for a referral, that he wasn't recommending you for the position. Exactly. He said he was making me aware of you so that you had options, and that whether you chose to explore them was entirely your decision." Nora looked at the kitchen door. "I'll have a conversation," she said, "later this week, not before Tuesday." "Of course," Patricia said. "Shall I call this number?" "Yes. Tuesday or after. Thank you, Miss Voss." She hung up. Nora stood in the corridor for a moment. Oliver Pritchard had given her name to a placement contact, not because she was leaving, because she should know she could. This was the kind of thing that Oliver apparently did, built bridges under people before those people needed to cross them, so that when the moment came, the bridge was there. She went back to the kitchen. She sat down. Emmy was on a new crane. Lena was watching her. "Everything all right?" Lena said. "Yes," Nora said. "Just a call." She thought about the document in the drawer of her room, the permanent position, the corrected salary, the benefit provision for her brother. She thought about the study upstairs, the shelf that was now straight, the origami book and the architecture book on the second shelf, the armchair back in its position by the window. She thought about options. She had not had many of them, growing up. She had had the ones she made herself, mostly. She had learned to make them out of the materials at hand, out of hard work and good memory, and the particular stubbornness of a person who has decided that the absence of obvious options is not the same as the absence of all options. Having an actual option, a call, a contact, a name given by someone who had seen her work and decided she should know she could go further, was different. She was not sure yet what to do with it. She filed it. She would think about it. She would think about it the way she thought about most important things, thoroughly, honestly, over more than one night. "What are you making this one?" she asked Emmy, about the new crane. "This one is for Nora," Emmy said, "but the wings have to be the same height." "All right," Nora said. "Take your time." She watched Emmy fold. She thought about options. She thought about permanence, and what it meant. Not just in documents, but in the sense of place. The study that she cleaned on Thursdays, the chair at the kitchen table. The particular quality of the early morning light through the corridor window that she knew now because she had watched it change across every season. She thought about her brother, whose medical costs would be covered by the benefit provision, who was 12 and in a program that was, his doctor said, going exceptionally well. She thought about the service corridor. She thought about the buzzing light and the green canvas bag, and a small person waiting with complete certainty that someone would come. She had come. She had stayed. She did not know, yet, all the ways that this one decision, made in a service corridor at 2 in the morning, without weighing the consequences, without knowing what was ahead, had changed the shape of things. She did not know all the ways it would continue to change them, forward from this point, in directions she could not yet see. She knew some of them. She thought about Lena, who was going to find a new position through a legitimate agency on her own terms, with her daughter beside her, with paperwork that was in order, and a legal situation that was no longer held hostage by someone else's leverage. Who was going to start something that was entirely hers? She thought about Dominic Hale, who had stood in the corridor of his own house and said, She stays here, as if this were a logistical fact. Who had called Oliver and made 3 phone calls and put an architecture book on the second shelf of the study? She thought about Mrs. Crane, who had asked the right question and received the right answer, and done something immediate and specific with it. She thought about Clara's hand on her shoulder, light and brief, not making it larger than it was. She thought about all the small things that had, across these 2 weeks, accumulated into something that felt like a structure. Not perfect, not final, but standing. Like the bear's second house. Smaller than the first one, more carefully built, sturdier. Emmy held up the new crane, both wings at the same height, symmetrical, or close enough to it. Done, she said. She held it out. Nora took it. She looked at it for a moment. It's very good, she said. Both wings, Emmy said. Both wings, Nora agreed. She set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She thought, I will think about the call. I will think about the option. I will think about what I want and what is possible and what is mine to decide. But not today. Today was Saturday. Emmy was on her next crane. Lena was making coffee, having learned, in the past 2 weeks, where everything was in this kitchen. She moved through it with the ease of someone who has spent enough time in a space to stop thinking about where things are. The house was in its Saturday order. The fountain ran. Nora drank her coffee. The crane sat on the table in front of her, both wings level, symmetrical, going nowhere and everywhere at once. Monday arrived the way Mondays did at the estate, with the full re-engagement of all moving parts after the particular hush of the weekend. Mrs. Crane's morning briefing had more items than usual, because the weekend had produced a list of things that had accumulated quietly, and needed the week to address them. Gerald's raking schedule was adjusted because a section of the west garden needed attention after the rain. The kitchen was putting together a shopping order. Oliver was calling in at midday for an in-person catch-up with Dominic. Nora moved through her Monday tasks with the practiced efficiency of someone who has had the same routine long enough that it has become automatic, which frees the mind for other things. She thought about the call. She had been thinking about it since Saturday morning. Not obsessively. She was not someone who turned things over endlessly, because endless turning was not useful, but steadily, with the methodical attention she gave to problems that mattered. The question was not, is the new position better than this one? She did not have enough information to answer that, and she was not going to base a decision on speculation. The question was, what do you want? This was the harder question. She had spent most of her adult life managing what was necessary, rather than pursuing what she wanted, because for most of her adult life the distance between the two had been large enough that looking directly at the gap felt impractical. You managed what was in front of you. You secured the next thing. You kept moving. She had, in the past month, been given something she had not had before. A position that was permanent, a salary that was fair, a situation in which the next thing was not uncertain. She did not have to secure it. It was secured. It was there. This left the question of what she wanted genuinely open in a way it had not been before. She was not used to the question being genuinely open. She did not know, yet, how to answer it. She was on the upper floor, doing the east corridor, when Dominic came up the stairs. She heard him before she saw him. The particular footsteps, which she could now identify with the same ease that she identified the house's other sounds. He was not going to the study, which would have required continuing past where she was. He stopped in the corridor. She looked up. He was looking at the cloth in her hand in the specific way of someone who is about to say something and is choosing the entry point. Oliver mentioned he put your name forward, he said. She looked at him. For what? She said. Because she wanted to know whether Oliver had told him everything or a portion. A position, he said, in the city. A senior management role. Someone he respects made an inquiry, and he thought you should have the option. She nodded. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not going to tell you what to do with it, he said. I want to be clear about that. The position here is yours regardless of what you decide. The amendment stands whether or not you explore other things. I know, she said. But I also want to be clear, he said, that the position here has changed from what it was when you arrived. And the change is not temporary. She looked at him. She thought about what he meant. Not just the salary, not just the benefit provision. The study that was hers to manage. The access that had been extended without discussion because it was earned. The fact that when he had said she stays here about Emmy, the first person who had come to his mind as the appropriate person to manage that transition was Nora. The position had changed. He was right about that. I know, she said again. Differently this time. He nodded. He went back downstairs. She stood in the east corridor with her cloth and she thought about the two things simultaneously. The call on Tuesday, and the corridor she was standing in, both of them real, both of them hers to consider. She went back to cleaning. At midday, Oliver arrived. He came through the entrance hall and saw Nora crossing it and stopped in the same brief, precise way he did most things. "Did Patricia Sutton call?" he said.
"Yes,"
Nora said. "Good," he said. "You could have told me you were going to do that," she said. He considered this. "If I had told you in advance," he said, "you would have asked me not to, and you would have made that request out of the same instinct that made you manage everything alone for 3 months. The instinct that says you should not take up space or create options for yourself when there are other things to focus on." She looked at him. "You've known me for 2 weeks," she said. "I've watched you manage a significant crisis at close range for 2 weeks," he said. "You learn things quickly in those conditions." She was quiet. "I'm not suggesting you take the position," he said, "or that you don't. I'm suggesting you go and find out what it is, so that the decision you make about the document you've already signed is a decision with full information, not a decision made in the absence of information." She looked at the entrance hall. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. He went through to the office. On Tuesday she called Patricia Sutton. The position was, as Oliver had said, a senior domestic management role. A large house in the city, privately owned, family residence with 3 children under 10, a couple who traveled frequently, and who needed someone who could manage the household independently and competently in their absence. The salary was higher than her current salary, the title was different, the responsibility was different. Patricia described it with the precision of someone who has been doing this for a long time and knows what information matters. Nora listened. She asked 3 questions. She thanked Patricia and said she would be in touch before the end of the week. She sat in her room after the call and thought. She thought about 3 children under 10. She thought about a couple who traveled frequently. She thought about the word independently, which Patricia had used more than once, and which meant, you would have full authority, you would make the decisions, the household would run because of you specifically. She thought about the study upstairs and the armchair and the origami book on the second shelf. She thought about Emmy, who was leaving in 2 weeks, and the crane on the table in the kitchen, and the way Lena had said, she should have asked for help. She thought about her brother who was 12 and whose program was in hand, and who had called her on Sunday and talked for 40 minutes about something that had happened at his school that was wonderful and detailed, and that she had listened to with the full quality of attention she gave to things that mattered. She thought about what she wanted. The question was still harder than it should have been, but she was closer to the answer than she had been on Saturday. She was, she realized, the kind of person who needed to do things herself, not because she was too proud to ask for help. She knew now that she would ask for help, differently, when it mattered, but because the doing itself was the thing she was built for, the management. The problem that arrives in a service corridor at 2 in the morning, or in a doorway where a man you work for is standing with a folder in his hand, or in a conversation with a woman at a table in a room off a corridor, and that needs someone to look at it directly and then do the next correct thing. She was good at this. She was very good at this. The question was, where did she want to do it? She sat with the question for another day. On Wednesday evening, she knocked on the door of Dominic's office. He was at the desk. He looked up. She came in and sat down in the chair in front of the desk, the same chair she had sat in on the morning of the Thursday that everything changed, when Emmy had sat in the other chair with her rabbit and her crane. "I'm going to meet with Patricia Sutton," she said. "I'd like to understand the position fully before I make any decision. I think that's the right way to do it." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "I'm not deciding anything yet," she said. "I understand," he said. She looked at the desk with the worn edges, the papers in their personal logic. "There's also the question," she said, "of whether there are ways in which this position, here, could develop. Over time, I signed a contract that corrects what I was paid and makes the position permanent, but a contract describes the current arrangement. Arrangements can change." He looked at her. She held it. "What are you asking?" he said. Not sharply, genuinely. "I'm asking whether the scope of what I do here has a ceiling," she said, "or whether that's a conversation that's possible." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's a conversation that's possible." She nodded. "Then let's have it," she said, "when you have time." "I have time Friday morning," he said. "Friday morning," she agreed. She stood up. She went to the door. "Nora," he said. She turned. "You should go to the meeting," he said. "Whatever the outcome here, you should know what's available to you. That's not a statement about what I want you to decide. It's a statement about what you deserve to know." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She went out. She stood in the corridor and breathed. She had asked for what she needed. She had not asked permission for it. She had asked for the conversation. She had set the terms of it. She had done it directly and without apology. This was, she thought, possibly the first time in her professional life that she had done this particular thing. It had not felt as difficult as she had expected. She went downstairs. She went to the kitchen. She made a cup of tea. She thought about Friday, and about the meeting with Patricia, and about the question she was still working toward answering. She sat with the tea and the question in the evening, which was settling outside the window with the particular quality of a Wednesday in autumn, gray, and soft and real. She was getting closer to the answer. She could feel it. The meeting with Patricia Sutton was on Thursday afternoon, in a coffee shop in the city that was the kind of place that meeting-oriented people chose. Quiet enough to talk, professional enough to take seriously, without the particular formality of an office that might put either party on unequal footing. Patricia was in her 50s, with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the manner of someone who has placed a great many people in a great many positions, and has developed, through this, a particular skill at looking at someone and assessing the distance between where they are and where they should be. She assessed Nora in approximately 30 seconds. Then she took the glasses off the chain and put them on and opened a folder. "Tell me about your background," she said. "Not the CV version, the real one." Nora had not expected this opening. She thought for a moment. Then she told the real one. Not all of it. There were parts of her background that were hers and that she shared only when she chose to. But the relevant parts, where she had worked, what she had managed, what had gone wrong and what she had done about it, the specific skills she had built through experience rather than through training, she laid out plainly and in order. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, Patricia took her glasses off again and set them on the table. "Oliver Pritchard called me," she said. "And he said, I want to make you aware of someone. He did not tell me why. He said the work she has done in recent months is beyond what most people do in a career. I've known Oliver for 12 years. He does not say things like that without reason." Nora looked at her coffee cup. "I'm going to tell you about the position," Patricia said, "and I want you to ask every question you have, because what I'm looking for is not someone who wants a position. It's someone who wants this specific challenge, for the right reasons, and who I can say without hesitation will still be there in 5 years, and will have made something better of what she found." She described the position. It was more than Nora had understood from the phone call. The household was large, larger than the Hale estate, with more staff and more moving parts. The couple who owned it were in international finance. They had 3 children, 7, 5, and 2. There was already a staff structure in place, but it was, Patricia said plainly, not working well. The previous manager had been adequate but not excellent, and the household had drifted into a kind of organized chaos that was functional on the surface and difficult underneath. What was needed was someone who could assess what was there, rebuild what needed rebuilding, and create a system that worked because it was right for the people in it, not just because it was a system. Essentially, Patricia said, I'm looking for someone who can walk into a complicated situation and make it better, who is not intimidated by complexity, who will do what needs doing without being told every step. Nora looked at her. "I can do that," she said. It was not arrogance. It was accurate. She knew it was accurate the same way she knew most true things about herself, not through announcement, but through the accumulated evidence of having done similar things, and having done them correctly. Patricia looked at her with an expression that was not quite a smile but was the professional equivalent of one. "Yes," she said, "I think you can." They talked for another hour. Salary, higher than she had expected, even from the initial call. The start date, which was flexible and could be discussed. The children, about whom Patricia had specific and affectionate things to say, that told Nora something about the family that a formal description could not. The staff who were already in place, and what they needed from the person who came in at the top. At the end of the hour, Patricia closed the folder. "Take your time," she said. "There's no pressure, but I'd like to know within 2 weeks, one way or the other." "I'll know before then," Nora said. "All right," Patricia said. They shook hands. Nora went back to the car. Paul was waiting. Dominic had offered the car, without being asked about it, which was the kind of thing that made her think about the Friday conversation, and what it might contain. She sat in the back of the car on the way home and looked out the window. She had 2 things in front of her, 2 real things, both of them possible, both of them hers to choose between. She had never, in her adult life, had 2 real options simultaneously. She had always had the option that was available and the option that was not. The thing that was within reach and the thing that was not yet. She had worked toward the not yet. She had been patient. She had built toward it in the way she built toward most things, methodically, in sequence, with her hands. And now there were two. She thought about the family with 3 children, the 7-year-old, the 5-year-old, and the 2-year-old, the household in organized chaos, the task of making something work because it was right, not just because it was a system. She thought about the study, the armchair, the shelf that was now straight, the Friday conversation. She thought about Emmy. Emmy, who was leaving in less than 2 weeks, with Lena, to start the next thing. Lena had found a position. She had called to tell Nora 2 days ago, with the specific vibrating energy of someone who has something real to report. It was a family in the south of the city. 2 adults, no children at the house, but flexible hours and a genuine welcome, and a situation that was straightforwardly what it appeared to be. She had confirmed it with Caroline. She had checked the contract. It was clean. It was hers. She was starting in 3 weeks. Emmy had responded to this news with a characteristic directness. "Will there be toast?" she had said. Lena had said yes.
Triangular.
"I will make it triangular," Lena had said. "Okay," Emmy had said, and she had gone back to her crane. Nora thought about the image of Emmy on the stool and Lena making the toast and the kitchen that had, for a brief extraordinary period, held all 3 of them together. She thought about what she would carry from that period, not in the way of grief. She did not feel grief about it. She felt something more like the feeling after a significant experience, the awareness that it had happened, and that it had mattered, and that it had changed the shape of things in ways that would keep being true regardless of what came next. She thought about asking for help, the bear's second house. She thought about what it meant to build something yours. The car turned onto the estate driveway. The gate opened before it stopped. The fountain ran, the hedges. She went inside. She did not have the answer yet. She thought she would have it by Friday morning. She thought the conversation on Friday would be the last piece of information she needed, and then she would know. She had learned, over the course of her adult life, that the right decision is often the one that does not announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary activity, making coffee, folding laundry, watching a child hold up a crane. And it is simply there, fully formed, obvious in the way that things are obvious only after you have done the thinking. She had done most of the thinking. She was nearly there. Friday morning came in clear, the kind of autumn morning that arrives occasionally between the gray ones with the particular precision of a gift. Bright, cold at the edges, with a quality of light that makes even familiar things look slightly new. Nora stood at the window of her room for a moment before going down. She looked at the grounds. Gerald was already at work, which he always was, the raking, the same path, the same rhythm, 11 years of the same motion. There was something steadying in this. She went downstairs. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table in the early quiet. She had the answer by the time she finished the cup. It had arrived in the way she had expected, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary morning, without announcement. She sat with it for a moment. Then she went to the office and knocked. "Come in," Dominic said. He was at the desk. The Friday papers were in their places. The blinds were up on the garden side, and the morning light came through in the way that morning light did on this side of the house, low and gold and warm. She sat down. He looked at her with the focused attention he gave to things he was assessing. She said, "I'm staying." He did not say anything for a moment. "Not because the other option wasn't real," she said. "It was real. It was a good position. Patricia Sutton is thorough and the family sounds like exactly what she described. The challenge would have been significant." He was quiet. "But I'm staying," she said, "because there is something here that isn't finished, and I don't want to leave something that isn't finished." He looked at her. "What isn't finished?" he said. She thought about how to say it. "This household," she said. "What it can be. What it should be. I've been here 8 months, and I've been operating at the level of the position I was hired for. Which is a good level, but it's not the ceiling. You said as much, and I think," she stopped, chose the next words, "I think what I'm good at is making things work the way they should, finding the problem and fixing it, and building the structure that keeps it from coming back. And there's more of that here than I've been permitted to do so far." He was quiet. "What would you need?" he said. "The conversation we said we'd have," she said. "About scope, about what the role could be." "Then let's have it," he said. But she had prepared for this. She had written nothing down. She did not need to write things down. But she had thought through it with the same methodical attention she gave to cleaning schedules and access patterns, and the logical sequence in which things should be done. She said what she needed. She said it plainly and in order. More authority over the structure of the household. Input into staffing decisions. A role that reflected the actual scope of what she was doing, not the scope she had been hired for. She named the specific things she wanted to build. A clearer communication system between the staff levels. A better process for handling situations that fell outside the standard schedules. A regular check-in structure, so that the thing Mrs. Crane had identified, the thing where people carried problems alone because they didn't know where to bring them, was addressed at the structural level, not just at the individual level. She said all of this. Dominic listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All of that is possible." "All of it?" she said. "The staffing decisions will involve Mrs. Crane as well as me," he said. "But the rest of it, yes, all of it." She looked at the desk. "I'd like Oliver to revise the contract accordingly," she said. "I'll call him this morning," Dominic said. She nodded. She stood up. She was at the door when he said, "Nora." She turned. He was looking at the desk, then at her. "The other family," he said. "Patricia's family. They'll find someone." "Yes," she said. "Patricia is thorough. She will. And the position here will be better than it was," he said, "because you chose it rather than accepted it." She thought about this. "Yes," she said. "That's probably true." She went out. She stood in the corridor. The answer had been the right one. She had known it the moment she said it, the particular internal steadiness of a decision that is correct, not just comfortable. The house around her, which she knew in all its specific detail, in the way that you know a place you have stayed long enough. The shelf that was now straight, the crane on the kitchen table, the study with its books in their personal order. She had chosen it. Not because there was no alternative, but because it was the right thing, for the right reasons, on her own terms. She went downstairs. She went to find Mrs. Crane, who was in the middle of the morning's briefing preparation, and she said, "I need 20 minutes with you after the briefing. There's a proposal I'd like to talk through." Mrs. Crane looked at her. "About the household?" she said. "About what the household can be," Nora said. Something moved in Mrs. Crane's expression, the same thing that had moved across it when she had come to Nora's room and asked the real question. Recognition of a person who is going to do something useful. "After the briefing," Mrs. Crane said. "After the briefing," Nora agreed. She went to the kitchen. She poured a second cup of coffee. She sat down at the table, in the chair that was her chair. The morning light came through the window. Outside, Gerald raked. The day began. The morning briefing went the way morning briefings did. Practical, ordered, efficient. Mrs. Crane moved through the list. Gerald's schedule, the kitchen order. 2 rooms on the main floor that needed particular attention before the weekend. Oliver was coming at 11. The east wing windows needed the outside done before the weather changed. When it was over and the staff had dispersed to their tasks, Nora stayed at the table. Mrs. Crane sat down across from her. Nora laid it out. She had thought about how to present this, and she had decided that the way to present it was the same way she presented most things, plainly and directly, without softening the edges to make it easier to hear or hardening them to make it sound more authoritative than it was. Just the thing itself, as clearly as she could say it. She described the communication structure she wanted to build, not a new system overlaid on the existing one that never worked. A refinement of what was already there, identifying the places where information moved slowly or not at all, and creating specific routes for it. Who reported to whom on what? What counted as something to bring forward and what could be managed at the level where it arose? A regular brief meeting, not the daily briefing which was operational. Something weekly. That was about the household itself. How it was working. What wasn't. What needed attention before it became a problem. She described the check-in structure she wanted for the staff. Not supervision in the way of monitoring. The kind of check-in that says, "How are you?" Specifically, actually. Not as a social nicety but as a genuine question. The kind that Mrs. Crane had been doing informally with some staff for years, elevated to something that was part of the structure of the household rather than something that happened or didn't depending on who happened to be in the kitchen at the right time. She described what she thought the scope of her role should be. She said this carefully, because this was the part that affected Mrs. Crane directly, and she wanted to be clear that she was not proposing to diminish what Mrs. Crane did, or take authority away from her. What she was proposing was a clearer definition of the levels. Mrs. Crane ran the daily operations. Nora managed the structure those operations sat within, not parallel, layered, working together. Mrs. Crane listened to all of it. She was quiet when Nora finished. Then she said, "The weekly meeting. Who attends?" You and I, Nora said. And we decide together what else is relevant to bring in, situation by situation. It should be small enough to be real. And the check-in structure. Who owns it? Both of us, Nora said. In practice, you'll do most of it, because you're already doing it informally. What changes is that it's formal, it's consistent, and there's a route for anything that comes up. Mrs. Crane looked at the table. You're describing something that requires trust between us, she said. Yes, Nora said. It does. Mrs. Crane was quiet for another moment. Then, I trust you, she said, simply. The way she said things that were important, without elaboration, as if they were facts and facts did not require decoration. Nora looked at her. Thank you, she said. Mrs. Crane stood up. I'll be available at 3 to go through the details, she said. Bring specifics. I will, Nora said. Mrs. Crane left. Nora sat at the table. She thought, this is what I was built for. Not the moments of crisis, not the service corridor at 2 in the morning, though she had managed that too. The architecture of things, the structure that holds, the quiet, patient, thorough building of a system that works, because someone thought it through correctly, and then stayed long enough to make it work. She picked up her coffee. It was the right temperature. She had been sitting with it for long enough that it had cooled to exactly the point she liked. Clara came in from the corridor with a basket of things for the upper floor. Big morning? She said, reading the room the way Clara read most rooms, accurately and without needing to be told. Productive morning, Nora said. Clara looked at her for a moment. She had the expression she wore when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was thinking. She said it. You look like someone who's decided something, she said. I have decided something, Nora said. Good, Clara said. Good, Nora said. Clara nodded. She moved toward the door with her basket. Triangular toast, she said, which was her way of asking whether Emmy was down yet. Not yet, Nora said. She'll be down soon. I'll have it ready, Clara said. She went out. Nora sat with her coffee. She thought about Emmy's departure, which was 10 days away. She had been thinking about it in the way you think about things that are coming that you cannot stop and that you do not entirely want to stop even when they cause a specific kind of ache. Because the departure was right. Because Lena and Emmy going out into their own lives, their own arrangement, their own version of what came next, that was the correct outcome. That was what 3 months of holding the thread had been for. She thought about the paper cranes on the windowsill of her room, which Emmy had placed there over the course of the past 2 weeks, one at a time, with the specific deliberateness of someone establishing a record. There were 11 of them, each one slightly better than the last. The first ones had the creative independence of early work. The recent ones were recognizable. One of them, the one she had made on Tuesday, was genuinely beautiful, symmetrical, balanced, the wings at the right angle. She thought about what she would do with them when Emmy was gone. She thought she would leave them on the windowsill. Because the crane was not just a crane, it was the specific evidence of a person who had been here, and who had learned something while she was here, and who had left the learning on a windowsill for someone else to keep. Nora had kept a great many things over the years. Most of them were not objects. She would keep these too. The morning moved through its hours. Oliver arrived at 11, and met with Dominic, and when he came out he stopped in the corridor, where Nora was passing and said, "Contract revision." He said it the way he said most things, as a heading for a longer conversation that he was about to summarize. End of next week. He walked me through what you discussed. It's reasonable. I'll have a draft for you by Wednesday. Thank you, she said. He gave her his brief nod, the one that served, in Oliver's vocabulary, as a full expression of several things. She went on. At 3 she met with Mrs. Crane, and they went through the details. It was a thorough conversation. Mrs. Crane asked precise questions and Nora answered them, and when the answers were not complete enough, Mrs. Crane said so, and they worked through to the better version together. It took 2 hours, which was longer than Nora had planned, and was exactly as long as it needed to be. At the end of it, Mrs. Crane said, "When do you want to start?" Nora thought about this. "Monday," she said. Mrs. Crane nodded. They went back to their respective tasks. That evening, Lena found Nora in the East Wing corridor again, coming back from the laundry room again, which appeared to be the location where the important conversations happened in this house. "I heard," Lena said, not accusatory, just informed. This was a household, and households moved information. "About what?" Nora said. "That you were offered something in the city and you stayed," Lena said. Nora looked at her. "Who told you?" "Clara," Lena said. "Who heard from Helen? who presumably heard from the walls. Nora thought about this. It was not wrong. In a household, the walls did eventually tell things. I stayed, she said. Lena looked at her. Was that because of us? Lena said. Because of Emmy? Because if it was… No, Nora said. Clearly, it was because of this. She gestured vaguely at the corridor, which was not the most eloquent gesture but which meant the house, the work, the thing she had started and had not finished. Lena looked at her. Okay, she said. Okay, Nora said. They stood in the corridor for a moment. Emmy cried today, Lena said. Not about leaving. About leaving the Crane collection. She said she can't take all of them. She can take them all, Nora said. She said there are too many to carry. She can take the ones she made here, Nora said. I'll keep the ones she left on my windowsill. Lena looked at her. Why those? She said. Because they're in the right place, Nora said. They should stay where they are. Lena was quiet for a moment. You're a strange person, she said, with warmth. Yes, Nora agreed. I am. They went to the kitchen. Emmy was at her stool, working on what appeared to be the most ambitious crane yet. 2 pieces of paper, folded together into a configuration that was not in the book, and that was entirely her own invention, whose structural integrity was being tested in real time, as the thing slowly achieved the shape she had in mind. Nora watched. It held. Emmy held it up. It was not entirely a crane. It was something between a crane and a boat, with elements of both, functioning as neither and yet somehow making complete sense as itself. What is it? Nora said. Emmy looked at it. It's a new thing, she said. It doesn't have a name yet. It needs a name, Nora said. Emmy thought about this with great seriousness. It's an Emmy, she said. Nora looked at the thing on the stool. An Emmy, she said. Because I made it, Emmy said. And it's new. And it didn't exist before. Nora looked at it for a long moment. That's the right name for it, she said. Emmy set it in the center of the kitchen island, in the space that was hers. It sat there, the small invented thing, new and unnamed until now, not quite a crane and not quite a boat and entirely itself. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the fountain ran. The evening settled in. The morning they left, Nora woke before her alarm. She lay still in the dark and listened to the house, quiet, real quiet, the kind that means the day has not started yet, not fully, and there is still a strip of time that belongs to the night. She had always liked this strip of time. It was the part of the day that was entirely hers, before the house began its machinery, before the tasks arranged themselves in order, before the morning asked anything of her, just the dark and the sounds and the particular warmth of a room she had been sleeping in long enough to know every shadow. She looked at the windowsill. 11 cranes. They were just visible in the dark, shapes against the lighter dark of the window, each one slightly different from the last. She had looked at them every morning for 2 weeks. She would, she thought, continue to look at them every morning for a long time, and they would not feel like absence so much as record, evidence that this had happened, that they had been here. She got up. She went downstairs quietly, not yet 7, and made coffee. The kitchen in the early morning was the same as it always was. Gerald's rake was in the corner by the door. The chair that was hers was pulled out slightly from the table, the way she left it when she was the last to go to bed. The stool at the kitchen island was empty. She sat down. She drank her coffee. She thought about the first time she had sat in this kitchen, the Tuesday morning of her arrival, 8 months ago, when Mrs. Crane had shown her the house and she had been shown the kitchen, and she had sat in the wrong chair, because she did not yet know which chair was hers, and she had figured it out quickly and moved, and Mrs. Crane had not commented on this, which she had later understood to mean that Mrs. Crane had noted it and approved of the self-correction. 8 months. A great deal had happened in 8 months. Some of it was the kind of thing that could be described in orderly sequence. Some of it was not. She thought about the service corridor. She thought about this less than she used to. It had been the central thing, the thing everything turned on, and now it was becoming the way most significant things become eventually. Background. Not forgotten. Not unimportant. Just integrated into the larger picture in the way that shapes become part of a pattern when you look at them from far enough away. The morning came in through the window by degrees, gray to pale, the quality of the light changing in the specific way of autumn mornings on this side of the house. Clara arrived first, as she usually did on the days when she was on early roster. She came through the kitchen door and stopped when she saw Nora. "You're early," she said. "So are you," Nora said. Clara poured her coffee and came to sit at the table. She did not say, "They're leaving today." She did not need to. She sat with her coffee and looked at the table and was simply there, which was, Nora thought, exactly the right thing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Clara said, "Do you know where Lena is going to be, the new position?" "Millbrook area," Nora said, "south of the city." "Not far." "No." "That's good," Clara said. "Yes," Nora said, "it is." They drank their coffee. At 7:30, Emmy appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was fully dressed, which meant Lena had been up for a while. She had her rabbit under one arm and her bag over her shoulder, the bag that Lena had packed with the things she could bring, which included the more recent cranes, the origami book, the bear book, and the stuffed rabbit, who had been with her the longest and who was not negotiable. "Say, bro." She stood in the doorway and looked at the kitchen. She looked at the stool. She went to it and climbed up, with her bag, with her rabbit, and she sat there one more time with her back straight, and her feet not quite reaching the floor, and the particular posture of someone who is going somewhere, and knows it, and is doing the correct thing first, which was sitting in her stool, and being here for the last time, properly. Clara looked at Nora. Nora looked at Emmy. "Toast?" Clara said. Emmy looked at her. "Please," she said. "Triangular," Clara said. It was not a question anymore. It was simply what it was. Nora watched Clara make the toast. She watched Emmy eat it, slowly, in the methodical way she ate things she wanted to last. The rabbit sat on the island beside her. The bag was at her feet. When the toast was finished, Emmy looked at the empty plate for a moment. Then she looked at Nora. "Will you write down how to make it triangular?" she said, "for Mum." "Your mum knows how to cut toast," Nora said. "She cuts it in squares," Emmy said. "She's done it wrong before." Nora looked at Clara. Clara looked at the counter. "I'll write it down," Nora said. She found a piece of paper, a corner torn from the notepad on the kitchen shelf, and she wrote, "Cut diagonally, corner to corner, both directions. 4 triangles." She folded it twice and gave it to Emmy, who put it in the pocket of her jacket with the seriousness of someone putting away an important document. "Thank you," Emmy said. "You're welcome," Nora said. Lena came in at 8. She looked around the kitchen with the same assessment she had given it on the morning of her arrival back, taking it in, fixing it in memory. She had a bag over her shoulder and she was wearing her own clothes now, not the borrowed things from Mrs. Crane's resourcefulness. She had sorted that out over the past 2 weeks, Clara having gone on an errand with her to the city to collect a few things. She looked like herself, more like herself than she had looked in the small room off Francis's corridor, when she had still been wearing the surface of someone who had been in crisis. She looked at Nora. Nora stood up. They stood in the kitchen for a moment, the two of them. Then Lena said, "I'm going to call you." "Yes," Nora said. "Often." "All right." "And Emmy will want to talk to you more than I will, probably. You should know that in advance." "I know that," Nora said. Lena looked at her for another moment. Then she put her arms around her. It was brief, not long, not dramatic, just real. The weight of it, the specific warmth of someone standing very close, the particular quality of a human embrace between two people who have been through something significant together, and who are both, in this moment, choosing to acknowledge that directly, rather than saying it in words. Then they stepped back. Emmy, watching from the stool, said, "Are we going now?" "Yes," Lena said. "Can I say goodbye to Mrs. Crane?" "Of course." "And Patrick?" "Yes." "And Gerald?" "Emmy." "Gerald is important," Emmy said. "Yes," Lena agreed. "Gerald is important." They found Mrs. Crane in the entrance hall. Mrs. Crane crouched down to Emmy's level, which was not something Nora had ever seen her do, and which took a specific kind of intention. And she looked at Emmy very directly and said, "You have been an excellent guest." Emmy considered this. "Thank you," she said. "Your crane folding improved." "It did," Mrs. Crane agreed. "I have been practicing." Emmy nodded, as though this was the correct response and she was glad to hear it. They found Patrick in the utility corridor, and he crouched down too. Patrick, who hardly spoke, and he said, "Safe travels." 2 words. His maximum. "Thank you," Emmy said. Then she said, "You're quiet." "Yes," Patrick said. "That's all right," Emmy said. "I know loud people." Patrick said nothing, but something moved through his expression that was not quite a smile, and was more than one. They found Gerald outside. He stopped raking when he saw them. He was not, Nora thought, a man who cried, but he held his rake with the particular stillness of someone who was controlling the expression of something. he said. "Goodbye, young one." Emmy said, "Will you still rake the same way every day?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "It's a good way." He went back to raking. They went back inside. The car was waiting at the front. Paul was there. He had already loaded the bags, which he had taken without anyone needing to ask, because he understood what was happening and did his job accordingly. The staff had gathered in the entrance hall, not formally, not announced, just present. Clara, Patrick, Helen, who had come from somewhere in the house when she heard the movement, Mrs. Crane. Dominic was not in the entrance hall. Nora had expected this. She had not, however, expected to look up and see him at the top of the stairs. He was standing at the landing, looking down. He had something in his hand, a small paper square. She knew, immediately, what it was and where it had come from. The origami book, which had been on the second shelf of the study, and which he had apparently opened at some point and from which he had cut or torn a square from somewhere. The crane he had made was, objectively, not well executed. The wings were uneven, the head was not quite right. It had the particular quality of a first attempt made by someone who had not done it before, and who had tried to do it correctly but had not had a teacher. He walked down the stairs. He crouched in front of Emmy. He held out the crane. Emmy looked at it. She took it. She examined it with her characteristic critical thoroughness. "The left wing is higher," she said. "Yes," he said. "The head is folded too much." "I know." She looked at it for another moment. "It's a first one," she said. This was a category she had established, in her own taxonomy of cranes. The first ones had a different standard than the later ones. You could not judge a first one by the same measure. "Yes," he said. She put it in the pocket of her jacket with the toast note. She looked at him. "You should practice," she said. "I intend to," he said. She nodded, once, with the satisfaction of someone who has issued a correct piece of advice and had it received well. He stood up. He looked at Lena. "Oliver will be in touch on Monday," he said. "The paperwork side of your situation should be progressing by next week. If there are any complications, you call Oliver directly. He has your number." "Thank you," Lena said, simply, the word carrying everything that couldn't go in a sentence. He nodded. He did not say more. He stepped back. They went to the car. Nora walked with them to the front door. She stood on the front step in the autumn air, while Paul opened the car door and Lena got in, and Emmy climbed after her with her bag and her rabbit. Before the door closed, Emmy leaned out. She looked at Nora. "You didn't finish the crane," she said. Nora looked at her. "What crane?" "The one from this morning. The one you were going to make me." She said this with the conviction of a person who has been told a thing they are absolutely certain of, except that Nora had not, in fact, told her she was going to make a crane this morning. Nora looked at her. "I didn't say I was going to make you a crane," she said. Emmy looked at her. "No," she said, "but you were going to." There was a pause. Clara, behind Nora, made a small sound. Nora looked at Emmy. She looked at this child who had appeared in a service corridor at 2 a.m. and who had changed the shape of the following months in ways that were still, in some measure, unfinished, who had sat in an armchair in a private study and held a paper crane and said "Mum," in the specific voice of someone who has been absolutely certain the whole time. She reached into her pocket. She did not, in fact, have paper in her pocket. Clara appeared at her elbow with a square of paper, torn quickly from the notepad on the hall table, folded once into a square. She held it out. Nora took it. She stood on the front step and she folded the crane in the way she had been taught over the course of 2 weeks by the most patient and demanding teacher she had encountered, and she folded it correctly, each crease deliberate, each angle right, and when it was done she held it out. Emmy took it. She looked at it. She looked at Nora. "Both wings," she said. "Both wings," Nora said. Emmy sat back in the car. Paul closed the door. The car moved down the long driveway. The gate opened before it stopped. The car went through and the gate swung closed, quietly, behind it. Nora stood on the front step. She watched the gate. She stood there for a moment in the autumn air, in the grounds with the hedges in their places and the fountain running and the car gone now, past the gate, moving through the city toward a new arrangement, a new kitchen, a position that was chosen rather than taken. Clara stood beside her. She did not say anything. Nora did not say anything. They stood there for a few seconds, the two of them, in the quiet of a morning after something significant has passed through it and moved on. Then Nora turned and went back inside. The entrance hall was its usual self, the hall table, the clock, the staircase leading to the upper floor. She went to the kitchen. She sat down at her chair. She looked at the empty stool at the island, which was just a stool now, in the way that anything is just itself when the person who has made it theirs has gone. She thought, it will not always be like this. The particular emptiness of the first day after. She knew this from experience. You sit with it. You let the room be itself without the person. Then, gradually, the room is just the room again, and the thing you carry forward is not the absence but the shape that was made. She picked up her coffee cup. It was the right temperature. She had made it carefully enough that it would stay that way. She drank it. The morning continued. At 9 o'clock, she had the first of the conversations she had scheduled, with Mrs. Crane, and then later with Patrick, and then a brief check-in with Clara that was more personal than operational. She moved through the day in the way she had always moved through it, in sequence, with her hands, with the particular focused attention of a person who is doing the right thing in the right place. At noon, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Emmy. She picked up. Hello, she said. We're at the new place, Emmy said without preamble. It's big. There's a garden. Is there? Yes, with a tree. I'm going to climb it. Be careful. I'm always careful, Emmy said, in the tone of someone who is not always careful and knows it. How's the room? Good. The window is bigger than the other one. I put the cranes on the sill. Good, Nora said. Mum is talking to someone, Emmy said. I snuck away. You should probably go back. In a minute. A pause. Then, Nora. Yes. I put the crane you made me in the middle. Which one? I've made you several. The last one, Emmy said. The one on the step, both wings. Nora looked out the kitchen window. The grounds. Gerald's path. The fountain. I'm glad, she said. I put yours in the middle, Emmy said. And the one the other man made. I put that one last, because it was his first one. That seems right, Nora said. It goes first, last, middle, 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 Emmy said, describing the arrangement. The best ones go in the middle. And whose is in the middle, Nora said. A pause. Mine, Emmy said. Obviously. Obviously, Nora agreed. There were sounds from the other room in the background, Lena's voice. I have to go, Emmy said. All right, Nora said. I'll call again. I know, Nora said. I'll pick up. Okay, Emmy said. A pause. The small, comfortable pause of someone who has said the main thing and is just being there for a moment longer. Then, bye, Nora. Bye, Emmy. The call ended. Nora sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the window. The day was moving through its hours the way it always did. The particular autumn light shifting across the grounds, the hedge lines, the long driveway with the gate at the end. Gerald somewhere out there, in his pattern. The house doing what it did. She looked at the empty stool. She thought about the cranes on a new windowsill in a new room, arranged in the order that a 4-year-old had decided was correct. First, last, middle, middle, middle. The best ones in the middle. She thought about what goes in the middle and what it means to be in the middle of something. She thought, this is the middle. Not the beginning. The beginning was the Tuesday morning 8 months ago. The single bag, the sensible shoes, the entrance into a new place without announcing herself. Not the end. The end was somewhere else, later, not yet. The middle. The part where the structure is built, where the roots go down, where the work is not the getting here but the staying and the making something of it, where you are past the crisis and before the certainty of what comes next, in the specific present of a life that is going in the right direction. She had been in harder places. She had come through them. She was in this one now, a kitchen in a house she knew, with work that was hers to do, with a door that she did not need to watch anymore, with a contract being revised to reflect what she actually was rather than what she had been hired as. She had chosen this. Not because it was the easy thing, not because she couldn't have chosen otherwise, because it was the right thing, for the right reasons, in the right place. She thought about the bear. The second house, smaller and sturdier, built with more care. She thought about the question a 4-year-old had asked that was probably the most correct observation in the room. The bear should have asked for help. Yes, she thought. And now she had. She had said things she needed to say. She had asked for the conversations she needed to have. She had brought forward the thing she was carrying instead of carrying it alone until it was too heavy. She was learning. She picked up her phone and texted her brother. Just, "Morning. How are you?" He replied in 30 seconds. He always replied quickly. Her brother, who was 12 and enthusiastic and had a great deal to report at all times, with a message that was 3 paragraphs and a photograph of something he had made in art class that was, by his account, a masterpiece and should probably be in a gallery. She looked at the photograph. She wrote back, "It should definitely be in a gallery." She set the phone down. She looked at the kitchen, the house around it, the morning. Fully arrived now, the light through the window as ordinary and clear as any other morning. She thought, this is enough. Not in the sense of settling, not in the sense of this is all there is and she must be satisfied with it, in the sense of, this is real, this is here, this is mine, and it is enough to begin with. She got up. She put her cup in the sink. She went out into the entrance hall, where the day was waiting, where the list of things was arranged in the correct order, where the house was doing what it did when someone who understood it was there to make sure it did it right. She went upstairs. She went to the study. She opened the door. The room was in its Thursday order, clean, still, the books in their personal logic, the lamp on the shelf with its characteristic flicker and steady, the old desk with the worn edges, the armchair by the window. She stood in the doorway for a moment. The light came through the window and fell across the room the way it always did at this hour, and the room was exactly itself, and she knew it the way she knew it because she had been here enough times to know every corner of it, every smell, every draft, every slightly leaning shelf. She went inside. She picked up her cloth. She started with the upper shelves, the way she always did. She moved through the room in her usual sequence. She was in the right place. The day began.